Oh, baby! It is time. It is time. Friendos, I just want to say welcome. Welcome to the 6th episode of the HUD. Hold on, I forgot to start on my AC. This is embarrassing. It was just getting so lit that I forgot to turn off the AC. I did. That accidentally might have happened. Hold on, I'm getting... Oh my gosh, what is going on here? Okay. First of all, I want to welcome you all. If you guys are new to the HUD... In general, it is a Call of Duty esports, in some ways radio, but in some ways it's a podcast. It'll always be defined as a podcast because apparently everyone has a podcast nowadays. However, this is to be formed as more of a radio-esque show. Of course, you guys can't see me, probably a good thing for all of you, myself included, to get away with embarrassment. Just kidding. I try to combine it. It's meant for someone to watch, to be able to watch the show, but also be able to just kind of just hang out, have this in the background. If you're doing something else, just be able to chill. It's a chill show. You know what I mean? It's a chill show. So that's just kind of how it goes, man. It's how it goes, pals. I just want to give a massive thank you to all of you who have already followed the stream. I'm going to give you guys a shout out really quickly. If you guys haven't already followed, give you guys a huge shout out. I believe we have I'm Blake, Pizza, Top Blasts, MNCHH, Munch, maybe, if... I think that's what it is. Hashtag chill. That's exactly right, Justin. It's Caustic, Cody Ritual, Randale 5, Chippy, who just recently followed, and also I got a donation, a $1 tip. Thank you very much, man. From Chris's from Pixel Maniacs. He said, "Greet from the Chroma Gun team. We have just sent you a free key." What is that for? Check your emails. That's interesting. Well, thank you very much. Either way, it's $1 regardless. Hopefully, that's not an ad. I think it may be. Who cares though? The $1 is still a $1. So thank you very much. Thank you also to Justin as well as JMac FPS for the follows. You guys are fantastic. You guys are awesome people, man. You guys are absolutely fantastic. Wait, what is this? Okay, I get it. I was making sure, because Ron had tweeted me something. I thought that I had actually banned him by accident. That didn't actually happen. So, today we're going to be going over the MLG Orlando predictions. Of course, this is episode 6. Before we even hop into what is MLG Orlando, if you guys are curious, if you guys want to follow the social media, if you guys do enjoy the show throughout the entire time, feel free to follow the social media links above. Those are going to be there throughout the entire show. Not just my social media links, but the HUD's as well. Currently going on with a little bit of interesting stuff with SoundCloud. Didn't actually realize that you have to pay for a monthly subscription if you want to upload over like 6 hours of content, and obviously the first 2 episodes are like over that, or the first 3 episodes are like over that, so that's not really going to work out unless I'm going to spend like $20 a month on SoundCloud, and if someone really wants it up there, maybe we can try to make it happen. But I'm working on to get it to iTunes. I think iTunes is overall a better place, but I think SoundCloud's a cool alternative, so we'll see what happens with that. That is a link that you can kind of like look at and maybe say maybe, possibly, but you don't have to click that one. Lando Cod on Twitter. Most of you guys probably know me from there. If you haven't, though, make sure to follow me there. Air Landed on YouTube, where all the HUD VODs are currently uploaded. It's the only place where you can find them. Of course, Instagram, L1 Lando. Don't really use it that much, but it's there. And of course, the HUD TV on Twitter. Feel free to follow that, get to that, and it also kind of just points out everything that has to do with the show, when it's going up, when announcements are coming, always that stuff, you can find it there, very, very easy. I've also been working on a really cool project that I'm really, really looking forward to showing you guys that's going to happen soon, and I'm really happy with it. It's kind of like my gift back to Call of Duty esports, so I'm just going to leave it at that. It's really cool. I'm really looking forward to kind of having that come up shortly for those who may be curious. Everyone's saying face reveal in the chat. You guys are fantastic. But no, so stuff we're going to be talking about in this particular show as we finally hop into things. We're talking about a little bit of H2K. We can talk about the recent news that was kind of happened, but most of this is going to be focused on purely what MLG Orlando is about, what's going to be happening, my predictions, my thoughts, after all the time that I've spent watching these guys throughout the entire year, and really, realistically, from a team perspective, how long that I've been able to watch them as a squad together. How I think that they've been performing, what I've seen from Reddit, people's comments, everything kind of compiled into one stream. So it should be good. Really looking forward to it as well. So along with the recent team announcements, we do have that. We have new organizations that have been announced, being like Kingsman, I think. The new TK roster was officially announced. Of course, the MLG Orlando pools, were announced. And of course, we do have the DT situation, which is going to be more of a post-show type of thing. Not really a post-show, but it's like, I know most people are here for the MLG Orlando predictions, my thoughts, going over the open bracket, which we're going to be going over the open bracket as well, not just staying away from only the pools, but also the open bracket stuff. But I'm going to be touching on the DT situation, my thoughts on how everything went with them. I do have a little bit of information I'm going to be talking about for that, and also my idea behind how we can maybe improve those things in the future. I've taken ideas, comments from Reddit, people just on social media, even players as well. So we're going to be covering that. So if you guys are interested, want to stay maybe a little bit later and go over DT situations, we will be doing that. So without further ado, Pease is motivated, man. He is motivated. He says, get to it. I'm ready to get to it. So for those who don't know, of course, MLG Orlando happening this weekend. Of course, this is all preparation for what is the qualifiers as well as Call of Duty XP. Final tournament that we know of as far as the majors considered. When it comes down to the prequel, I guess what you could say, to what would be Call of Duty XP. Call of Duty Champs, the largest tournament in all of Call of Duty esports history. But before, obviously, we do have some last-second team announcements. We did kind of talk about this on the last episode, which is important to mention. All this stuff kind of came to fruition, except for one of them. H2K officially announced the 4th of Dito. Not going to go into that. We'll save that for once we get to the pools. MW officially announced a second roster. Yeah, they announced a second roster for those who didn't know. Technically, now it's their first roster, and then their normal one went to kind of like their second based on who's on the team and whatnot, which is going to be composing of Methods, BL Fire, Sensor, and Examples. An interesting group. Didn't really ever think that that's going to be a possibility of a team, but it is. And a new org known as Kingsman announced a team of Lamagod, Miracles, Mox, as well as Parasite. So that team who has been playing for a very long time with one another officially announced an organization under the name of Kingsman. Not very well known. I know they've been trying to dabble in some other esports, but they're not the most well-known esports organization as of yet. So we'll get to kind of see how they do perform in their first really huge event. So we'll see how that kind of goes. So as far as MLG Orlando is considered, of course, we do have a $100,000 prize pool. Absolutely crazy. Not really that crazy, but it's still a big prize pool. It's obviously something to mention, I believe, as well as 2,500 points for the winner, as from what I've been able to kind of gather information of. And so before we hop into the pools, who is in what pool? We're going pool by pool, pool A, B, C, D, and whatsoever. So for those who might be a little bit curious as to how the qualification process is kind of considered, how that basically kind of goes, essentially, the qualification is by the 12 teams who are in a Call of Duty World League. They all get invited to MLG Orlando, right? So all 12 teams, even 100 Thieves got an invite, right? Well, technically they did get it. They had the opportunity to get an invite, is what I'm trying to say here. All 12 teams got an invitation or an open invitation to potentially join if, and only if, they keep 3 out of the 4 players who were in that team at that time. So, for example, I believe there were 3 teams who didn't end up qualifying. It was Complexity, 100 Thieves, as well as Cloud9, who was actually kind of interesting to me personally because I didn't realize that they hadn't actually went along those lines. But those 3 teams automatically aren't able to get into the pools directly. Now, what happens after that? Since those 3 teams are going to make it, that leaves 3 more spots to teams with the highest amount of pro points, as well as teams from other leagues. So the first spot available would end up going over to the EUCWL. They get the first spot, the first opportunity at getting into pool play, which I think is great. I personally am a big fan of that, trying to get the EU teams involved, especially with how great that they've been performing recently. That first spot is going to be going to Infuse, so they automatically get placed into pools. And then it fell to the highest seeded CWL points team at that time, and I believe that ended up being Complexity as well as TK. So Infused, TK, and Cole automatically get placed back in the pool. So Cole, who lost their spot, they come back with a new roster and they're able to get back into it again. TK, who's been gone for so long, kind of been unfortunate for them. And of course, the one EU team who's coming over trying to brave the storm is going to be bringing it over as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how those squads kind of how they kind of line themselves out as. But unfortunately, for the first pool, that's not really going to compose them necessarily. So what I'm going to try to do actually, because I forgot to add this particular image. So this is going to be kind of a last-second thing. I apologize. This is the one thing that I forgot to add, and I have a graphic made for this, and I'm hoping that it pops up directly. I might not have saved it, to be honest. That's going to be kind of sad if I didn't actually save it. I did save it. Wonderful. So it's going to pop up. It's going to be kind of weird. That was actually not a bad transition. So this is the screen that I'm going to be showing you guys for right now. We can kind of go off of it. I might take it away, just like that. I don't have like a great transition or anything like that, so I apologize. But this is how the pools are kind of lining themselves out as, or the groups, if you want to kind of call them that. I will be kind of going back in the chat, like I said, like this and that. So we're going to be going over Pool A or Group A, which is going to be composing of 3 teams as well as an open bracket. The top 4 teams from the open bracket automatically get placed into the pools, which we'll go over in a little bit later. But Group A, composing of Team Envious, the XTSM roster, as well as Elevate, and of course an open bracket top 4 team. So we're going to be going over each team, my predictions on who makes it through, maybe even get your guys' opinions as well, and maybe even throughout each group, you guys can give your perspective or your opinions on who you guys think will end up making it through this entire, not just the entire tournament, but through this entire pool directly, which I think is kind of important to mention. So if you guys have, at any time during when we're chatting about this, when we're talking about stuff like this as well, feel free to put in your predictions or your thoughts, your comments about stuff that you've seen, that you've witnessed, that you think should be mentioned in the chat, or just mentioned in general that I'm going to be looking at as well, because I do have the chat pulled up. And yeah, so that's just kind of how it's going to kind of be going. If you guys just want to put like your top 2 for Group A, that's kind of where we're at right now. Feel free to do so. So we're going to be going over the first team, though. I know this has been like a long lines of progression that we're trying to make here. But the first team to be looking at from Group A is obviously going to be Team Envious. I think this is basically a no-brainer right now as far as this pool is considered. You do have these 4 teams, these 3 teams considerably, but you can't take out the pool play teams. Just non-disclosure. Every time I go over a group, keep in mind that any open bracket team could be placed here when it comes down to what seed or what ends up happening, because there could be an amazing team who ends up getting to Group A. I think based off of my knowledge, I believe that it goes that the number 1 seed goes into D, number 2 seed goes into C, number 3 seed goes into B, and number 4 seed goes into A, I believe. So if that is the case, Kingsman then will be placed into Group A if they make it through the entire bracket without losing. They don't go into losers bracket, dip into that. If they end up making it through the entire bracket, I believe they will be placed into Group A. So that's kind of interesting to mention as well. So that's not guaranteed. I'm not going to act like it's guaranteed. I'm just going to keep that in the back of your minds when it kind of comes down to it. So Envy, yes, they're major favorites in this pool. That's not at all a surprise to anyone right now. I wouldn't say this is an easier pool for them by any means. This is actually a pretty good group of guys that they have. They're personally, to me, deemed as the second best team in the game right now. I think behind Optic Gaming, they look to be, at least in my opinion, the second best team in the world. Because generally when you look at it, who is the second best team in the world right now? What, Rise? Probably not. What, you want to put FaZe up there? You want to put an EU team up there right now? No one has really solidified their spot indirectly. So to me, it's kind of up to discussion who you think is the second best team in the world right now. And I don't even think besides Optic Gaming, anyone has an idea who's second, third, fourth, because over the last few tournaments, things have been absolutely changed up. Rise Nation has not been at their top performance, which we'll talk about them a little bit later. Envy has looked at least pretty good for right now, as of late, since the recent roster moves that they've made. So to me, I think indirectly, hot off of a win at Season 2 Finals, granted it wasn't versus the best team in the world at the time, and then facing off against DT in the finals, which no one predicted as far as I'm concerned. To me, they are the second best team in the world right now, and could potentially be a squad who can beat Optic Gaming at times. And maybe not on a consistent basis, but at times it's possible. And I think the reason how that performance happens isn't just through one player, but it's through a player who, to me, is without a doubt a top 5 player in the game who doesn't really get recognized that often. Does not get recognized that often. That is John, man. John has been performing incredibly well. Incredibly well over the last, couple months of this game? I mean, in the beginning of the game, he performed incredibly well, right? With Luminosity Gaming, him and Saints, that duo that ended up forming, that was a good group. That was a great group of guys. Of course, they didn't really have the best performance overall, but just those two indirectly, they were by far what you leaned on. If you were a Luminosity fan, if you were watching Luminosity, every single time, John was the main guy leading the way. Saints was as well. Ultimate consistency is what the sub-presence brought. It was the ARs who were kind of, in some ways, had a little bit of the problem. So when I look at Envy and I see how well that John did, especially at Season 2 Finals, that is an indirect replica of how that their overall performance was. JCat was playing incredibly well. They were all playing top-notch Call of Duty. If you look at the top 5 KDs, I think all 4 of them were in the top 5. If not, JCat was like top 6 or something like that. They can do that. And granted, you have to keep in consideration as well, they only played, what, like 2 matches? 2, 3 matches in the playoffs? 2? Yeah? So that's something to kind of keep in mind. It's actually 3. I apologize. But still, when it comes down to it, if they can play up to their best ability, and Apathy has been playing great as well recently, from what I've been able to watch. Like, in Hardpoint, guaranteed like 40 kills at almost like every single game. It's been crazy to watch him play recently. So if you can have the ultimate sub-duo of John and Apathy, Apathy who at times can play a little bit slower when he's playing with good players. He can be a little bit inconsistent. Ever since playing with Team Liquid, though, that just seems to not be the case. Him and John, though, together are the ultimate sub-duo right now for me. Then you have the great AR presence from a guy like Slasher, who is definitely in comparison for a top 2 spot in the AR position. Octane hasn't been looking as nearly as good as recent. Then you have Captain Clutch, or Captain J-Cap, leading the way. Great player, great overall playmaker when it comes down to their uplinks and TTFs. They are, to me, probably the best uplink and TTF players right now in the game on a consistent basis. Not just for strategy, but just overall, like, knowing the lanes. If you watch, I want to point this out. If you at any point during this weekend have an opportunity to watch, if you have an opportunity to watch them play uplink and TTF this weekend, make sure to watch JCap. If they're playing a Stronghold, or if they're playing maybe an evac, maybe not, but if they're playing like a regular CTF map, maybe like, let's say this, maybe like a Breach CTF or something like that. Watch JCap if you get the opportunity to. Now, I'm not sure like how the Codcaster is working. I'm not sure if they're going to have the numbers labeled. It's a lot easier to kind of watch the minimap now if you're a fan at home. But say like JCap's like number 2, number 3, or something like that. Just watch that number. Just float around the map. If you're an AR player, just watch it, because he is a perfect example of how to hold the lanes and how to overall watch which players are coming where, holding down lanes, making sure that the flag cap goes in correctly. And to me, it's important to watch guys who have been playing this game for a long time just do it. And he's someone who's been incredibly consistent throughout his entire career. He's not to have the best games. He's not been the top 5 player in every single title that he's played in. But he's consistent. And that's exactly what MVS needs. They need a leader who can be consistent, kind of take that captain's role. And J-Cap is a perfect guy to do that. So to me, without a doubt in Pool A, I'm not going to be focusing this much on every other team. But I wanted to kind of bring this up because it's kind of like a up in the air thing right now. Someone will say, you know what, MV isn't as good as you think they are. It's only been a couple of events. They've only just got a little bit of a luck streak that they've had. Maybe that's true. And then some people are saying that they are without a doubt the top 2 team in the world, which I think is probably the case. I think they are a top 2 team in the game right now. And the fact that it's up for discussion just goes to show how crazy the CWL is right now. That's 100% true right now. You know what I mean? Nobody knows 2 through 5. Who is in the top 5 besides Agapti Gaming? What order exactly? Because DT is now up there. If you would have told me that DT would be the top 5 teams after like week 3 of season 1 or whatever, or whenever they end up adding Killer to the team after dropping Happy and all that stuff happened, I would not believe you at all. I don't know what I would say, but it would not be polite, and I would not agree. We'll move on. So after Envy, we also have XTSM, and the reason why they're called XTSM is that recently, of course, they have lost one of their players known as Colchan. By most people's opinions, probably one of the more talented players when it comes down to this roster, if not the best player on this team as far as slang is considered. They lose a great overall sub player in Colchan. They end up adding Burnsoff, which to me, I'm a big fan of Burnsoff. Great player, great overall dude as well. Good overall characteristics and a good overall teammate. But to me, this was not the best pickup as far as roles are considered, because now you look at the whole TSM team, or ex-TSM team. Of course, for those who don't know, TSM ended up releasing this roster and whatnot, giving them all the credit that they have and have had. TSM ended up releasing them, and they said they would be interested potentially in finding a team for Call of Duty XP. Whether it's this team, whether they pick up the same team or not, probably not. And maybe that's TSM's polite way of saying, hey, we're getting out of Call of Duty. Like, we're trying to get our path away from you guys right now. Whether or not that's the case, they do end up losing a great player in Colchan, though. And they add in Burnsoff. If you want to kind of compare the two, Burns not necessarily more focused on slang. He can be consistent at times. He has a little bit of inconsistency problems. But he's not a slayer. Burnsoff isn't a slayer. When you look at his overall gun skill, when you look at the things that he does, he's the definition of an objective player. So, in my opinion, if you're watching Burnsoff play, he's going to be having the SMG out. He's going to be having the VMP out, the Kuda, whatever you want to put in his hands. is going to be throwing trophies constantly in the hill. It's exactly what he did for Team Liquid. And I'm not sure that that's what TSM needs. I'm not sure if they need more support. I think they honestly need more slang. That's been the kind of the issues that they've suffered throughout the season. If you look at their hardpoint and their search and destroy, which are game types they desperately need improvement on, especially a hardpoint, they were combined 12 and 36 in Stage 2 for both hardpoint and search and destroy. 12 and 36. So if you're coming at me, this isn't a best of 7. It's a best of 5 for pool play, by the way. I didn't mention that. So if you're coming to me and saying that in their Season 2 record without Burns Off and even adding a better Slayer and Colchan, that definitely helps in hard points. A 12 and 36 team adds a support player along with Ivy, who's also another support player or an objective player, whatever role you want to throw out there. So now you have two guys playing in some ways similar roles in past, never have been known as Slayers for their respective teams. And now they are the team who's going to be looked at, half the squad is going to be looked at to get the slang done. They've never done that in their entire career. So I'm not saying that the squad didn't improve or anything like that, because definitely they can. You know what I mean? I know that they have constantly said the reason why they wanted to release him and whatnot, it was kind of like a overall thought of decision, is the fact that they wanted to release him because of his attitude. They didn't really enjoy playing with him. However that ends up working, right? I think it was overall an interesting decision for them to make, and at the time, it might have been the only guy who was available, or it might have been the only top guy who was available at the time for them personally. So you can't throw that out the window. I'm just saying, for me personally, looking at Burns Off's play throughout the entire game and comparing it to Ivy, it's basically the same thing. And if you try to do this in past, it's not really worked. Whatever Call of Duty title that you've been able to watch and you've seen an objective player, probably not in Advanced Warfare. It's probably not a good example for Advanced Warfare because there were hardly any objective players throughout that game. I can think of 3: Nade Shot, Replays, and Censor, who were known at the time. But if you want to look at a title like Ghost, for example, if you want to look at the opportunity where they end up adding Imbos and Nade Shot on the same team, not going back that far, there are certain characteristics that come from title to title, and it's just like, this doesn't work. It's just like, it does not happen, right? This whole idea of trying to add a similar role together, when it comes down to someone who plays an objective style, it's a lot different than trying to put an AR player on the same team with another AR player, or adding someone who's an AR Slayer to someone who's an Anchor AR. When it comes down to the objective, it's a little bit different because that's a different mindset. You have a totally different mindset than anyone else. So I'm not sure who's going to take that role of what was Colchan, for example, because of course when it came down to TSM early, it was Wheats who was running the sub whenever, actually, if you want to go back to the very beginning of TSM, whenever even Proofy was on the team, right? When the team was first picked up, Proofy was the AR for the squad. Ivy wasn't even on the team yet, and Wheats was a hardcore sub. He was literally the objective player. So the roles can definitely switch around. I know Burns Off has put a little bit of AR at times. I've not been able to watch them. I'm not even sure if any of them have streamed. I don't think the Ivy, Wheats, or Pac-Man stream as far as I know. I know Burns Off has in past, but I don't believe that he's been streaming as of late. So I personally haven't been able to watch them play more. However, though, I'm really looking forward to seeing how they play. I really am. I'm really curious to see how they perform. I'm curious to see how they perform in Hardpoint and Search and Destroy indirectly. And I think the teamwork might be there. And especially in past, or even recently, if you want to put that in point, teams who have kind of struggled in the slang, but at least have the communication, they've been playing pretty well. DT is a perfect example of that. So, normally I would say probably not going to make it through this pool. Still thinking that. However, though, you do have examples of squads who have had a similar position who have risen to the occasion. So I'm just going to put that out. I'm just going to say that right now, not counting out TSM, but I am choosing Envy, and I'm also going to be choosing Elevate, who I'll talk about right now. Of course, Elevate didn't make it to Season 2 finals, unfortunately for them, due to how close the league was. I believe they were in like the 4th or the 5th position, and they automatically, after like 2 weeks, went down to the 9th spot. I think based off of like percentage points, they were off by like 1% behind the other 3 who were up there, being like LG and DT and those teams. Incredibly close, H2K as well. Incredibly close to making it to the finals. I believe they ended up going like 0-4 or 0-3 their last games in the CWL. So in some ways, kind of hurt themselves, kind of screwed themselves over in some cases. They ended up losing to 100 Thieves, which caught everyone off guard. And they ended up making it, or they didn't end up making it to Season 2 finals, which is a big deal because they came off a runners-up second place finish at MLG Anaheim, which not really many people predicted. Which they were a good team. It wasn't that they weren't a good team, but they were more of a consistent top 5, top 4 maybe team at the time. And no one really expected them to have that much success at the tournament. So the fact you have a team who places top 2, don't even make it, or doesn't even make it to the playoffs of that particular season, just goes to show how crazy the Black Ops 3 has been toward the latter part of these last few months. Of course, like I said, they played well at Anaheim. They have a good track record when it comes down to events. Recent roster moves have happened. Of course, Remy leaving the team and whatnot. And adding Felony. Should have mentioned that as well. They're a good team. I like the team a lot. They're a solid roster. That's 100% sure. There's no doubt in my mind that they're not a solid roster and that they can still perform. I am curious, though, to see how that they do, of course, with not making the finals. They're not as hot. They're not off of, playing a LAN as the other squads have. Because whether you believe it or not, the lack of LAN so far in Black Ops 3 have easily hurt some of the players' overall performance. So if you look at it, the last tournament that Elevate has played at was MLG Anaheim. They didn't play a Season 2 finals. So that directly just goes to show that they might not start off the tournament hot. And I don't know who they play first. Of course, I can pull up the schedule if I'd like to. But just in general, though, if you guys want to put that in the chat, feel free to do so. But they're going to come out a little bit shaky, come out a little bit slow, of course, for them not having the best performance in the world. I know they want to come out and just prove everyone wrong who might be doubting them. But they're a consistent team, man. They're a consistent team. They're fairly decent in hardpoint. Surprisingly, they're not the best in Search and Destroy anymore. Ever since they lost Remy, their Search and Destroy has absolutely plummeted. It's one of their weaker game types along with Uplink. And they're only guaranteed wins a lot of the time with their hardpoints as well as their CTFs, which they seem to be pretty good at times. Their Uplinks can be good. I think if they're facing off against a good slaying team, which one of them is going to be Envy, they're probably not going to win that. However, they're playing versus TSM and an Uplink, I definitely give Elevate the win. So to me, I'm definitely giving Envy the spot to come out of this. I think Elevate easily has an opportunity to make that top 2 spot. But if you see a roster man like Kingsman make it through, if you see Kingsman make it through the pools, which I believe is possible, or not just Kingsman in general, but just any of the open bracket teams, they can definitely challenge an Elevate. Imagine if a Cloud9 comes out and gets put in this group. A Cloud9 who is easily, in my opinion, on paper improved, go up against an Elevate team. I'd love to see Havoc in every chance I get to see an opportunity where Havoc and Nogvin go up against each other, I just love that. So to me, I'm looking forward to seeing how this pool specifically plays out. Of course, we can't assume who's going to be in the 4th spot. Of course, it will be an open bracket team. However, though, I'm looking forward to seeing how the rosters perform, especially XTSM. The addition of another objective player, to me, wasn't the best decision in the world. But can the chemistry kind of bring them forward? I think generally, though, everyone's opinion is Envy and Elevate, no question. And to me, I definitely agree with that. Curious to see how XTSM does, though, and as well who the open bracket squad can be. Because there are some very, very good, let me say this right now, there are some definite teams who can make some noise in some of these groups. As long as they're not going to Group C. Group A, B, and D, if you get the right team in there, without a question, an opportunity where we could see some major upsets, where that open bracket team, it wouldn't surprise me at all if we see at least 2 open bracket teams be placed in the top 2 who automatically go to the championship bracket. Wouldn't be surprised whatsoever, because there are some very, very good overall squads in that particular open bracket. So we'll move on, though. We're going to go over to Group B, which is going to be composed of DT, Infused, a.k.a. Team EU, as well as H2K. Of course, everyone knows the issues with DT recently. Not going to go into it too much. Of course, there has been a lot of turmoil with them. They were also the runners-up at Season 2 Finals. They ended up taking out FaZe as well as Luminosity Gaming in Game 7. I oftentimes call them the Game 5 and Game 7 veterans because they're so used to being there. They're a very consistent team. They're also very difficult to read. When it comes down to a certain game type, if you're facing off against them, it's very hard to know what strategies they're coming on with. And as much as people want to make jokes about, Killo's going to be kind of proving them wrong, but, he's going to try to throw them off with certain strategies, he actually does that. He actually does that. I watched, in one of the cast-off games I ended up casting over, I ended up having DT versus Rise on Game 5, Search and Destroy. Somehow, DT ended up taking the first 2 games. And this was the Rise of old, right? This is the old Rise, and it's sad that I have to say that now, but it was the old Rise, easily top 2 team in the game at that current time. The last event was like Season 1 playoffs, where they ended up taking Optic to the Game 7 or whatnot. So they're this is like one of the peaks, right? This is one of their peaks at the time. And they're facing off against TT, and it's Hunted Search and Destroy. It's Game 5. Of course, Hunted, got to keep that in mind, not an often played Search and Destroy map. However, though, I just watched Killa play. I just watched Killa play because I had the clip, and I was watching him play after we had casted over it, because I was curious how they ended up winning. Because they ended up winning, I believe it was like 6-4, something like that. They went up like 5 rounds to 0, 5 rounds to 1. And, Rising just tried to make a little bit of a comeback, and I was kind of curious and whatnot. But the reason how they got those first 5 rounds was all due to Killa. And I could tell at times because he would be making decisions on the fly. And it's funny how you can see that happen in game for some players. But I would watch Killa in the game, and he would start to go one way, then immediately turn another, which means I know that the gears are spinning. I know that they're doing certain things. And the fact that I like so much about DT is that they're constantly communicating. It's constant communication. They're constantly trying to read the other team and make sure the other team can't read them, or make sure that the strategies aren't as easy to read as other squads might. Because if you watch some squads play, it's like, oh, we're going to ban out the VMP for this hard point. Well, the next hard point rolls around. Wow, I bet they're going to ban the VMP again. Let's go and ban it. It's like very small strategies like that teams can just easily pick up on. The casters can even pick up on it. And often it's very hard to, whenever you're a commentator, it's very hard to kind of pick up on like often bans and stuff like that because you're kind of focused on the moment and stuff like that. So it can be difficult to kind of focus on the strategies. But there are some times where it's just completely broad. Everyone knows exactly what's going on here. This team is not being at all sneaky with what they're trying to do. DT, however, is not that team. They're a squad who I've oftentimes watched, and they're very consistent with a lot of the things that they do, but a lot of the times they can also switch it up. I've watched them play phase. I think every time that I watch them play phase, their main objective is to get rid of the kinetic armor. Why? Because they don't practice the kinetic armor. They've developed strategies for themselves that amateur teams have recently done to where they don't practice on doing certain things. It's almost like DT is practicing for an open bracket the way that they practice, because they will ban out or not use certain things, and that's exactly what open bracket teams do. If you watch some open bracket squads, some of the top open bracket squads in the world right now, maybe besides like Echo Fox or teams like that, like Cloud9 if you want to put them in that case, but just overall squads from open or just amateur teams as well, they will literally not practice with certain abilities. They will not practice with certain weapons because they want to be used to not running something normal, so they won't run stocks in their SMGs. I know Royalty's even a guy who recently does that as well. They just practice things that aren't normal, so whenever those bans have to come in or where they're playing against a squad who might be good at this certain thing, catch them off guard, they're ready. They're ready because they've practiced it before. So while people might say, oh, it's Killa Squad, of course, he's, performing something maniacal, he's going to be doing something what everyone thinks is crazy, he's going to point out the camos, make the guns shoot faster, and like, no. DT is smart. They know what they're doing. It's a good point that Foul Birthday mentioned in the chat right now. Incredibly great with a Man of War. Killa cannot run an M8. Everyone knows that. So they're going to be focusing that as their first bans at all times. Their M8 is not the best. If you catch them on a map like Evac, they're going to absolutely destroy you if you're not the best team at slaying. So yeah, I'm looking forward to watching DT play this tournament. Especially after a good performance at Season 2 Finals. They can grind out games, man. It would not surprise me whatsoever if we see them go up against Infuse and they go to Game 5. I almost said Game 7. They'll go to Game 5. It's possible. I'll just say that. Next team we have is going to be Infused, a.k.a. Team EU. I know there's a lot of overall support for the guys from Europe. Infused, great overall roster. Good guys in general. I like the Infused lineup, man. They've been a squad who have been together for years. It almost seems like you watch some other esports teams are like, this squad has been together for like 6 years at this point. And I'm looking at Call of Duty, I'm like, well, what team can kind of compare to that who's been together for such a long time? It really Infuse is one of those lineups. Of course, they ended up qualifying due to the fact that at least one spot was available. The first time that a spot would be available, Infuse would have gotten it. I'm glad that they don't have to go through the open bracket. I'm glad they don't have to go through that process. And normally in past, if I was looking at Advanced Warfare, I was looking at Ghost, if I was looking at Black Ops 2, maybe Ghost Advanced Warfare specifically, I would say, yes, they need to go through the open bracket. They're not at the same level as competition in A. That is not the case anymore. That is not the case anymore. At times, I have considered EU teams to be in the top 5. 2 of them. At times, I've literally said on stream before, I would compare at certain points in Black Ops 3, where EU teams, 2 indirectly, were in the top 5 at that time. And that has never happened before. That discussion would never happen a year ago. If we're talking about advanced warfare, maybe you can make it, a little bit of a case for a certain squad here and there. But for me personally, man, I've been a major fan of this Infused roster. Not as much as I've been a fan of Splice, but I really am a fan of this Infused lineup, to be honest with you. I have been. For those who don't know the roster, Marky B, PD, Urban, and Zero. Zero's my guy, good friend, good pal, good overall player. Marky B, of course, experienced veteran, along with even PD, really. Experienced guys, they know exactly how the communication is working. And to me, it's always good to have a combination of just, good gun skill along with overall chemistry. Rarely do you see that in Call of Duty, but every time you do, it's always a successful lineup that has that or has those capabilities. Chemistry and gun skill will always be the main factors of what makes a team successful, along with communication. But I think communication and chemistry kind of go, walk hand in hand. So, along with Infused, which I kind of talked about a little bit, I'm curious to see how they perform, though, at this particular tournament. Every time so far that we've had a tournament in this year where an EU team has come over or where EU and NA teams have kind of come up against one another, Infused, as well as the EU teams have not downgraded. They've shown up, right? They've definitely shown up. You've seen Splice take out teams. You've seen Infused take out some rosters as well. Infused didn't have the best performance at Anaheim, but they did take out their brother team, which was a grind out of the game. I ended up watching that game in the, I believe that might have been like the Bravo stream or something like that. I ended up watching that. That was like where 3 EU teams were playing at all times. It's pretty crazy. Did I say Orlando just then? I meant to say Anaheim. I'm not sure if I said Anaheim or not. If I didn't, I apologize. I meant to say Anaheim. But I'm glad they don't have to go through the open bracket. They don't need to go through the open bracket. In my opinion, they're definitely up there with the top 6 squads in the world right now. They're looking great. They're looking good. They've not slowed down at all. And I'm really curious to see, especially how the likes of PD and Urban perform. I know you're going to get a definite performance out of Zero. Zero is, without a doubt, one of the better Slayers that we have from Europe. In comparison, definitely as the top 2, top 3 player right now for sure. Mark could be the leader, the communicator. More of a support-minded player. Urban more of a standard AR. And PD, the objective guy. I got a lot of hope for this Infused team, man. I really hope that they make it to the top 2 in this pool. I really think they will as well, which we'll go ahead and kind of talk about that. So next team we have going to be H2K in here from, I believe, Pool B or Group B, however you want to kind of line it up as. H2K, though, hot off of a roster move, a roster change, much like the squad of TSM, they lose definitely in a lot of people's opinions, probably one of their better submachine gun players, really their top young players that they have in the game right now, along with their overall roster. They end up losing a major playmaker, Lacefield, and they end up replacing him with Dido from Cloud9 Eclipse. In my opinion, they lose slaying power, but they kind of increase their overall objective-mindedness. And to me, whenever I look at this indirectly, right, I look at this indirectly and I say, well, they lose Lacefield, great sub-slayer, and overall, along with just being a playmaker, he makes smart decisions. He's a smart player. And a lot of the times when you see a young guy kind of rise to the ranks and whatnot, you don't really see a whole lot of... Or you kind of notice some flaws in his game. You notice some flaws in his game to where he's performing well, he can make decisions, but his overall mindset just isn't there. And in my opinion, Lacefield's mind is kind of a lot more developed than a lot of younger guys that I've seen kind of rise to the ranks, especially in past years. Because he's a playmaker. He knows the game. He's willing to grind out the game. That was a major issue with H2K at Season 2 Finals, was that literally in the post-interview after they lost, after getting stomped, Fizzrup literally said, we did not practice, we were not confident coming into this, and we lost. And the 2 guys who were actually practicing from that team were Lacefield and Legal, the 2 younger guys from the team. And I've talked about this in previous episodes, but if you would have asked me who wasn't practicing probably on this team, without knowing any information about the players, only their past history, I 100% would have said Fizzrup is one of those guys practicing. The grind that guy has been on, whenever he's not necessarily been in the league, when he's not been at the highest tournament level or whatever, when he's not been his best, he's always constantly playing online tournaments. He's scrimming constantly. He's trying to work out different moves for himself as a player. I think there were times where Fizzrup would literally be playing Call of Duty more than I was actually awake, and Ghost especially. I mean, his streams are famous, right? His streams are famous because he's always grinding. At least he always was grinding. And so for me to hear throughout Black Ops 3 that teams haven't been scrimming as much as they have in past, with whatever squad you even want to say, even the top team in the world right now, even pointed out that they weren't practicing as much as they should have. But when you're a team who isn't even at the top level, I can give Optic maybe a little bit of a pass, right? It's lonely at the top. People always say it's lonely at the top. But when you are a roster who narrowly makes it, I can't even counterpoint on a calculator the percentage by how little they end up making it to the finals, and you don't practice? So I don't blame Lacefield for wanting to leave the team. I really don't. I don't blame Lacefield for wanting to leave the roster. It doesn't really surprise me that he ended up leaving the team. I kind of personally expect the roster changes to kind of loom with a particular roster, just for the fact that I had seen the frustration that they've had. I had seen Lacefield tweeting out, waiting for a scrim, or he's been playing with his teammates. I've watched the streams. I've watched all the streams. I know what the players are talking about. I know when a player isn't performing at his best, or whenever teammates are kind of getting mad at one another because they don't think that this guy is doing what he should. If you're not just me in general, but when you watch teams play, you can kind of get that feel. So to me, it wasn't a surprise that we saw H2K make a move. It's a big deal that they lose Lacefield, but they end up adding Dito, of course, from Cloud9 Eclipse. Now, I want to point out, I think Dito is a great player, but much similar to what the ex-TSM did, they add an objective player to the team. Now, I'm not hating on the fact that they're bringing on an objective player, because Lacefield was a guy who could do a little bit of both. He could slide, but he could also do the objective, which is great. It's great that he could do that. Illegal would kind of focus on that as well. Fizzip would kind of get his hand in that all at times as well. Fierce is really the only guy who's not going to be getting in the objective line because he's obviously the AR for the team. So, do I think H2K maybe improved from this? In my opinion, probably not. I know the chemistry that was involved with that team. I know they had a lot of heart behind what they did. The team house, you cannot take anything away from that. The amount of chemistry that they gained from that as well was big. That's why I always said there's positives and negatives to having a team house, where you can either get too comfortable with your teammates, or you can definitely, I think there are definitely positives and negatives from having a team house, because obviously you can improve. The chemistry is without a doubt going to be there, but sometimes you can be a little bit too friendly with your teammates. That sounds kind of strange, but it's true. Sometimes you can get in the groove to where, we're playing, we're doing our thing, but since you're with your teammates, they're your friends. You want to hang out, you want to do something else. So if you have teammates who necessarily aren't the most motivated, if you're kind of feeding off one another, you want to play COD, man? Not really. I mean, we played for 8 hours yesterday. We scrimmed for 5 hours yesterday. We couldn't even find a scrim. No one's scrimming right now. Let's just go do something else. Let's go do something else. Let's go play a different game. Or let's go out and party, whatever. So you can never take away the chemistry that the old H2K had with one another. So the chemistry automatically has been shot. The fact they haven't practiced has obviously been noted. They know that. I'm not sure how the practice regimen has gone for them. This tournament will definitely dictate how that's been going. An added player like Dito is good. He's a good player. Definitely could slay at times as well. But I don't think this team necessarily got a major improvement, if improvement at all. Because I think as far as the roles are considered, keep in mind, are considered, I don't think that the team is going to really see as much of a transition or as much of a benefit from this as anyone else would. Because if you add Dito to a team who's struggling with the objective player, or you're adding him to a team that maybe doesn't have the overall sub talent they need, or maybe a third AR, second sub guy, he can be that guy, right? He can be that guy. He's been a leader many times. He started a run in Advanced Warfare that he probably kind of set the pavement to me to show that just because you are a top player at that time doesn't mean that you can go and find amateur players and absolutely rise to the top with. If it wasn't for him, Lamagod, Dito, if it wasn't for Dito, Lamagod, if you wouldn't even put GodRx up there potentially for his, sub-in opportunities, Havoc, Silly, those guys would not be where they are right now if it wasn't for him. If he didn't do that particular step, if he wouldn't have done that, that team would have never existed. Those guys would not have at any point the pedestal that they have right now. And two of them wouldn't even be teaming right now, most likely, at least at this prestigious of an organization known as Cloud9. So to add someone like him is good, but I don't think that the roles are really going to benefit from that. So if we do take a look at Group B, of course, we talked about each team so far. We talked about DT, we talked about Infuse, we talked about the technically the XDT, excuse me. We talked about Infuse, we talked about H2K. This is an interesting pool to me because I think a lot of things can happen. I'm curious to see how H2K performs because their recent performances have not been good. When you're not practicing, that's obviously a major factor toward that. I think without a doubt we see Infuse make it through, and I think for sure we see DT make it through. Whenever I say it can be up in the air, is that H2K... There have been times where I'm thinking H2K doesn't have a chance. There's no way that they can make something happen, and yet they do some incredible things, whether that's been in the league or even at tournaments in past. They made it happen. So, if you were to ask me, who do I think is going to make it through this pool? Who do you think is going to make a noise? In my opinion, at least, I think that we are going to see both Infused as well as the XDT roster make it through. So guys, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we return, we talk about the new organization. Yes, a new organization has officially picked up the XTSM team as well as going over the final pools into MLG Orlando being Group C, which is the pool of death, as well as Pool D, going over the open brackets, as well as a player union idea. We'll be right back, guys. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, boys and girls. It is the HUD episode number 6, currently going over our MLG Orlando predicciones. Live during the show, I do have not really an announcement to make, but it looks like to me that organization has picked up the XTSM team, or really this TSM if you want to kind of put it that way. The old TSM roster has officially been picked up by EU United, or E United GG. If you guys want to go to their website, it is eUnited or eunited.gg. Unfortunately, though, the domain name has not been registered yet, so that's kind of unfortunate. That goes to show that they are the definition of a new organization. So that just kind of goes to show where they're at right now. The definition, like I said, of a new org. We've obviously seen that with different teams in the past. Teams like Primed, which I know was like a recently formed roster as well. So yes, no longer have to call them XTSM. They're under the name of eUnited. Kind of makes you think of like EU, like European, but they're not European, apparently. At least the roster for this particular tournament is not that. So if you guys have any information on them, I've never heard of them in my life. So if you guys want to maybe give any information if you heard of them, let me see, what are they like known on Twitter? Hold on, let me check really quick. I don't normally do this. Their logo kind of looks like an American Airlines logo, kind of like, or like a United Flights logo. And their overall bio says unifying esports fans and players, teams in CSGO and Call of Duty. So it looks like they're trying to form different lineups. Looks like they do have a CSGO team as well as now a Call of Duty team. So congratulations to Wheats, Pac-Man, Ivy, and Burns for finding an organization. And, TSM to this. Would you call it a downgrade? Yeah, you would. You would definitely call that a downgrade. So unfortunately, though, that's kind of how it goes, and we'll kind of move on to our predictions as well. Just going to point that out to you guys, bring it up. So TSM has officially found a team, or XTSM being under the name of E United. So we're going to move on to now Pool C, the Pool of Death, if you want to kind of put it that way. The Pool of Death, without a doubt, I think in everyone's opinions, the Pool of Death is going to be Group C, and in my opinion as well, which is going to be composed of Rise Nation, FaZe Clan, and Complexity Gaming, as well as an open bracket team. We don't know the open bracket squad. Got to keep that in mind. Who is it going to be? Could it be Echo Fox? Could it be ALG? Allegiance, a.k.a. Could it be Cloud9? Who will it be? Maybe even like a random team like I2 or MW or something like that. Maybe a Lethal. Who knows? Anyone could be in Pool C to just add overall to what has been a crazy group. Of course, everyone knows there's got to be at least one group that has a group of death. It's just how it goes in every single tournament. Sometimes we even have two of them. That's happened before. I believe there was like a randomness to where Optic Gaming could have had Rise and an Envy in their group or something like crazy. I don't think it was Envy. It was like a Rise Nation in their group. It was like a randomness thing. I'm not sure how the pools were actually drawn, to be completely honest with you. But I know that was a possibility. So I'm sure that Optic's happy with the group that they got. Despite what happened, I'm sure that FaZe maybe is a little bit complacent. So we'll see what happens with that. The first team we're going to be talking about is going to be Rise Nation. Rise Nation V2, I guess is what you can kind of say. Version 2. Because this is not the same Rise that we've seen in past. Heading into Season 2 finals, I was really looking forward to seeing how they would play. And the recent online performances, they've been playing very well. And I was kind of like ragging on them a little bit. I was saying, they're not playing very well. Maybe that was just me being a little bit hard on them. Maybe it was just me saying, you're not playing to their best ability. Me kind of speculating a little bit. However, the fact is, this is technically a different Rise Nation. They are just not at the same level they previously were. I'm not sure what I just said. Past tense. They're not the same team that they previously were. And that's not like speculation of, they may have been playing very well. It's fact, right? That they've literally not been playing the same that they have in previous. And to be honest with you, if Rise does not make it into top 2 in their pool, or at least make it far in this tournament, this team's going to have a dramatic change before Call of Duty XP. Not necessarily a roster change, but something has got to be switched around here. You don't make that big of a transition to being a top team in the game. You take Optic Gaming to a Game 7. And by no means do I think that Optic Gaming has necessarily had this massive transition to where they're now much better than Rise Nation. I don't think that was the case. I think it was just the fact that Rise Nation was right there next to them, and they slowly started to kind of fade away. And a lot of people have been kind of leading that toward Octane's performance. I would definitely kind of point that as probably one of the main things that's kind of swayed the roster as of recently. They have not looked on point. They've not been really performing really that well. It wasn't necessarily just LAN performances. It was shown in their online performances as well. It was like the last couple of weeks of the online league, they went like 4-4. I'm not doing those stats for real. But there was a point where they were just not playing well whatsoever. And Rise Nation, they were a team who I pointed out were the ultimate consistency squad throughout all of Black Ops 3, up till maybe like week 7 of the Season 2. Because of the fact that if you look at their stats, they were the only team in Stage 2, to have a positive game or have a positive overall record in every single game type. Meaning that they won more hard points than they lost. They won more search and destroys than they lost. They won more uplinks and CTFs than they lost. No one else did that. That's not just like a stat. It's like, Rise Nation along with 4 other teams did this. Like, no, they're the only squad who was able to do that. And no team was close to that. It wasn't like, FaZe lost it by like 1, hard point loss. I'm like, no. Of course, FaZe was a great hard point team, so I can't really even throw that stat out there. But they got that record for a reason. The fact that they had a slower performance for the end of the game just goes to show that that was a record that easily could have been much better than that. So now see the transition to where they're losing. They're not playing up to the point where they previously had, or they previously have. It's very, very surprising to see. Like I said, there's been a lot of overall focus on the fact that they haven't been performing as of recently. Whatever factor that's been, the fact of maybe not practicing as much, the fact of just not getting online to scrim. I know as far as I've been able to see, in a lot of the 500 series, I know they've been kind of combining with other teams. I know Elevate was forming, or like half of Elevate was playing alongside of Rise Nation. I think they ended up actually winning that particular 500 series. But it's sad to whenever you see a team who was doing incredibly well, and a lot of people's opinions definitely could have held the torch up to Optic Gaming, nearly took them out at Season 1 finals, nearly brought them down to round 11, or nearly brought them down to the loss, I guess you could say, in round 11. Very, very close. An incredibly talented team. And it was no surprise to me that they ended up beating Cloud9 in round 1 of the Stage 2 playoffs, just because the overall matchups did not work out whatsoever. There are some teams whenever they face off against another, and I think a lot of people need to kind of realize this. At least this is just my opinion. There are some teams who just do not perform well against other teams. That exists, right? That happens. There are some teams who just do not perform against others, and it's not the fact of, Rise Nation's facing off against Cloud9. Cloud9's looking really good as of late, and Rise Nation isn't looking that great recently. It's like, no. That may be true, take that into consideration, but look at the matchups. Look at the matchups. What is Cloud9 good at? What is Rise Nation good at? Rise Nation is good at Hardpoint. Cloud9 is good at Search and Destroy as well as Hardpoint. Well, if Rise Nation beats them in Hardpoint, they beat them in Search and Destroy, Cloud9 now has uplink and CTFs to rely on where they're not the most strong at. That's not the exact definition of what happened, but matchups do matter in Call of Duty and Black Ops 3. Probably more in this game than a lot of other titles in esports. So to me, the whole combination of Rise Nation beating Cloud9, granted, I'll give them credit that they won them. They beat them in a 4-0 sweep, but it's an awkward matchup for their opponent. But then they go up against Envious. And this to me was, I was thinking, oh, this could be a fantastic matchup. All the things that happened with Rise Nation. I gave them a lot of credit for the win versus C9 at the time. I was like, wow, they just didn't really destroy them. But they were just playing the great Call of Duty that they thought they could. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Rise Nation is back to the normal. This land solved their issues. They go up against Envy and they just absolutely get dismantled. It wasn't a 4-0. It was a 4-1, and it was not close. You can argue a few game types maybe here and there, but it was not close. At no point during that game, especially the first hard point, did I think that Envious was not going to win. And that's not necessarily the reason why I'm giving Envious the guaranteed second spot in the world right now, but it is why I'm not giving Rise Nation a whole lot of credit as of recently. It's not just, oh, it's a low point in their game right now. That's obviously true. No one would doubt that. Probably the Rise Nation players wouldn't even doubt that. But there is a dramatic change that needs to happen. If at this tournament, if there was ever a time to practice, trust me, everyone has been. If you go on Twitch, if you've been watching, everyone has been practicing. Dito even tweeted out, and he was like, I think this is probably the most active that scrims have been throughout all of Black Ops 3, and I agree with him. Teams are scrimming like crazy right now. And so what I'm trying to say is that if someone pulls out the excuse of, oh, we haven't practiced, I'm not saying that Rise Nation will. They could be one of those teams. I'm not saying that they will be. Probably not. But if any team pulls it out, not just even Rise Nation, that's an excuse of laziness. It's an excuse of laziness because of the fact that they don't have the drive to win anymore. If you're not scrimming right now, there is a problem with the team. Literally. There is a problem with the team. Because everyone else is scrimming. I can honestly, if H2K was to pull out the thing that they said at the last tournament, if Laceville wouldn't have left, if they would have pulled out at this tournament, no one, or that they hadn't been scrimming, I would literally lose it. I would literally lose it. I can kind of give a little bit of credit and say, well, you know what? Not a lot of teams are scrimming. It was a grind to find scrims heading into Season 2 finals. It was a grind to find scrims the last 2 months. I've watched a team, I'm not going to say who they were. I was watching a team, okay, I'll say it was FaZe. I was watching them play, and they got on for like an hour and a half, and they're like, well, it's going to wait for scrims. And they kept playing, I think they ended up playing like online. They ended up playing like 2v2s against one another or something like that. It took them like an hour and a half to find a scrim to play against a top team. That doesn't normally ever happen. So I can kind of hand it maybe to H2K. I can maybe take a little bit of the pressure off of them. Or maybe even off the gaming as well. Because I know their frustration with the Call of Duty World League was mostly the factor that kind of came into it. They even said that as well. Despite that, though, they both lost. But if you were to use that excuse now, I would lose it. Literally lose it. I sound like Kim Kardashian. I would literally lose it. I would, though. How are you not scrimming right now? I'm acting like they said that, but if that happens, that excuse happens, if I see anyone tweeting that out, I'm going to be very frustrated. I promise you, I will be very frustrated, and you will hear me talk about this on the HUD for the next episode. Someone will say it. It's going to happen. So Rise Nation, after my little bit of a rant, they've not been looking as good as recent. This to me is probably one of their final testaments where they can still make the fact that they are a top 5 team in the world right now. I'm realistically, if I have like a top 5 teams that I'm composing, they're kind of off to the side as like an edit, like a later edit that I'm going to put them in as, because I have no idea where they're at right now. They've shown some signs of brilliance. They can beat teams who they have good matchups against. But can they face off against the top teams more like they used to and just absolutely destroy them, dismantle them? They would dismantle great teams in Hardpoint. We'll see what happens. Next one we have from Pool C, or the Pool of Death. It should be Pool D if you want to call it the Pool of Death. Is going to be FaZe. FaZe, to me, out of this group, is the most apparent team to make it through. I like FaZe a lot. I have a lot of respect for this FaZe lineup. I have a lot of respect for the FaZe organization, not just because of their history, but because of the fact that they've been willing to stick together. This is a team who at times have been questioned. They've been put on the ringer, been saying, why haven't you guys made a roster change? Myself included. I've said that many times. I made a video that's like 30 minutes long that everyone hated because I literally questioned the entire time, should they make a roster change? And yet they haven't. And I have a lot of respect for that because at many times they could have. And I'm sure that they've discussed it. As close as those guys are, I'm sure that they've discussed it. But they've been looking really good online. Granted, they ended up losing first round to DT at Season 2 playoffs. I think them and DT are very, very close in skill right now. I think if it wouldn't have been DT that made it to the finals, I think it would have been FaZe. I really do. So that's the question of 2 through 5. Who do you have in 2 through 5 right now? Who do you have in 3 through 5? 3 through 6? Who do you have in that group in order? We can all put the teams there, but what order do you put them in? FaZe is one of those, obviously, question teams. Where do you put him at? Because as much as I want to say that they're improving, granted, they did lose to DT in round 1 of the Season 2 playoffs. It went to Game 7, though. And he did go to Game 7. So it wasn't like a stopping to where, oh my gosh, FaZe just did not put up a torch. Like, they couldn't do anything. They played well. DT was just better on that day. And DT has been looking really, really good, especially in the last month. So you can't take that much away from them, if anything at all away from them. I am a big fan of the FaZe roster, though, because, like I said, I admire their willingness to stick together. I admire that very, very much. I think they're also going to get rewarded for it. I really do. I think they're going to get rewarded from it. FaZe is a great lineup. Clayster, to me, one of the best players in Call of Duty history, leading the way. I think he's looked probably better in Black Ops 3 right now than he has for most of it up to this point. I think he's looked a lot better as of recent. I'm curious to see Attach's performance. I think Attach and Enable are the guys who are kind of, to me, on the ball right now. There was a time where I was trying to balance stats when no one was doing stats, when the Call of Duty World League hadn't released their stats yet. And I was trying to balance stats. I was trying to find, certain characteristics about certain players, like who is lacking in this particular game type, who's not really performing. And I'd watch every single, I think I watched maybe 6 or 7 series in a row of FaZe, believe it or not. I watched 6 or 7 series in a row. I was watching each game type, taking notes down, saying who's kind of underperforming, who's not, in all the losses that they had, who is not really performing at their very best. And a lot of the times whenever I was watching, whenever Attach and Enable weren't playing at their best, either one of the two, the team wouldn't win. Or the team had a close victory or a close loss. It was a close game whenever those two weren't playing their very best. And of course everyone knows the role changes that have happened with this team throughout the entire year. I mean, just trying to keep up with the team. There was a time, for those who know, I keep documents of Stage 1, Stage 2, what teams like to run certain specialists, what game types they're good at, certain strategies that they're trying to run, map breakdowns, records that they have as far as game types are considered, teams that they faced off against, what's their record. So, for example, I can look up like Stage 1 right now and go to who they played, like how many times they faced off against the LG team, and what was their record versus them, whether they won 5 maps or lost 5 maps or whatever ended up happening, 1-1, 2-0, 0-2, whatever. I was keeping all those stats, and it's been very difficult to try to keep up with what their role changes have been. I think all of them, besides Detach, have been the main AR at some point. I think all of them have tried to transition to an SMG at some point. And right now it seems that on most maps, because I think they've kind of solidified their roles for the most part, Zuma has kind of remained more of a roaming sub, which I had admitted personally that I thought that was the great move for them to make, is to have Zuma now be a sub player, transition him to being the same guy that he was back in Advanced Warfare, keep him comfortable, put him in the role that he wants to be in, that he's going to have success at. I think he'll succeed. And they've had a little bit of a better performance since then. But if you get him in the right, aka wrong matchup, they can struggle, man. They can lose to a squad like DT. They easily can lose to a squad like DT. It's possible. When you got them put in the hardest bracket in a lot of people's opinions, and whoever would make it through the open bracket, I think someone said if Cloud9 doesn't lose, then they'll be put in this bracket. Can only imagine what that would be, because to me right now, Cloud9 is one of the hotter teams out of the open bracket. You put Cloud9 in this group, I think Cloud9 beats FaZe. I really do. I think that there's a good chance of that happening. We'll move on. I know I keep focusing on a lot of these teams specifically and going off on rants. I'm going to try to go a little bit faster. Last particular team of Group C is going to be Complexity, which of course is a completely different team. One of the teams who ended up making it through the amount of pro points that they held. Of course, Complexity was in Stage 2. They ended up losing their spot due to making roster moves. Actually, 3 roster moves indirectly. Ricky being the only stable player who made it through that. Thankfully, though, they ended up having enough pro points to have the number 1 seed as far as pro points are considered, to have that first guaranteed spot into the groups for this particular tournament. So, of course, they now I can't even speak anymore. They now have a completely different team, in which case Ricky adds Aches, Lacefield, and Accuracy to the team. I know a lot of people are curious to see my thoughts about this particular roster. Complexity. Of course, Cole Aches is back. If you guys are curious, I covered this team whenever the announcement happened last episode. Give a lot of interesting stats that I personally looked up about Aches and Complexity's run. Of course, everyone knows about Cole Aches. One of the best roster, or really the best roster of all time. Along with that, though, one of the best overall combinations of an organization and a player indirectly has been Complexity and Aches. 12 championships. I can't remember the amount of first places that they had, but it's crazy. It's absolutely insane. I think I ended up doing a stat where they had like a 1.5 average Complexity did in Call of Duty for Black Ops 2. Never placed outside the top 4. I think they had maybe 2 second place finishes, like 1 third place and like 2 fourth places, one of those fourth places being at champs. That's crazy. That is absolutely absurd. So, of course, this is a completely different team than that Complexity, unfortunately. Completely different team than it was with the old Cole. As we talk about Aches, Aches' performance in Black Ops 3 has been great. I think his overall mentality has been stellar. I think ever since Black Ops 2, where people have kind of said, well, he's not really been the same Aches that he was in Black Ops 2. He's not the same Aches that he was back in Ghosts. But I think his mentality right now is better than it's ever been. He's a great player at Black Ops 3. He's a great player at Black Ops 3. And he wants to succeed. That's important as well. He wants to succeed. He wants to have success. And I know that the Cole guys, Crimsix, Aches, Clayster, TP, Karma as well, they have a lot of pride in the Cole name. They have a lot of pride in the Cole name. And whenever Complexity was struggling, you'd see a little bit of shots here and there, whether it's been on stream, whether it's been in tweets. They've said before that the Cole name is kind of in shambles. The team that actually Ricky was on, funny enough. But you have a lot of pride in that name. And so the fact if you add overall Aches' mentality, especially as of recently, and then you put him on an organization which has a numerous history, the best team of all time, without question, I think that only helps him. It really helps him a lot. Not as well, like Aches is going to be like a player who just completely comes out and destroys everyone and plays, like the Aches of old, which I hope happens. I don't think that's going to be that massive a transition, but I think that that's going to overall help his stability. It's like, you know what, Cole Aches, it just feels right. It feels at home. It really does. I feel better knowing that Aches is on Complexity right now. But along with Aches, along with Ricky, they do add 2 younger guys, being, of course, Lacefield as well as Accuracy. I did talk about Lacefield's performance for H2K. Left the team who really wasn't practicing very much. He goes to a team of grinders, literally, and Ricky and Aches especially. Joins these 2 guys without Accuracy officially joining the team yet. There was a lot of different force that they ended up trying out. A lot of different guys had the opportunity to be on this team. Parasite was one of those guys. Miracles was one of those guys. But ended up choosing Accuracy, which is kind of interesting. Ended up choosing Accuracy. Good AR player. Played for a lot of different teams in recent history. Played for Cloud9. if you want to really go back, played for Aware back in Advanced Warfare, where TCM came over from the EU, and his spot was kind of taken away. He was a part of one of the original Cloud9 rosters for Call of Duty, who ended up going to UMG South Carolina, along with Killa, and Sinful, Khalifa, I think. Yeah, it had to be Khalifa. And then they didn't perform, and then that team gets dropped. And people often make fun because he's like, he says he has the worst like luck in Call of Duty. I really think that might be true. I really think it might, and I hope that this isn't the case with this team. And a lot of the scrims that I've watched them play, this particular team directly, this group before, whenever I've watched this group play together, it seems that the players who I thought were going to be more consistent are actually. And it kind of came as a surprise to myself, because if I tell myself, well, I think these guys are going to be consistent, it's me kind of indirectly saying, well, I would hope that it'd be the other group, but it's really not. And that might seem kind of confusing, because me telling myself it's really kind of confusing, and I'm the one saying it. From what I've watched, it seems the guys who have been really consistent overall have been both Ricky and Aches. And the guys who haven't been as consistent have been both Lacefield and Accuracy. Those guys, at least as online is considered. And online plays a major factor, despite the fact that online has looked a lot more credible in recent history for Call of Duty. Does not mean that there's online instances that are just absolutely absurd. So that's a possibility. But I am curious to see the performance of Accuracy. I think you're going to see... This is a guaranteed point of view from Lacefield. But the thing is, though, point out a team that Lacefield played for before Apotheon and H2K. Can you do that? Can you point out XGN? Can you point out Mutiny from Advanced Warfare? Can you pull out Keemstar's team from MLG World Finals? He's played with a bunch of different guys. But more recently, he's been with this group since the beginning of Black Ops 3. So the transition for him might be a little bit different. He's a younger guy. He's not used to, more recently, making a big change. Having a big change in his overall game style. So to me, it's not a big surprise to see him. That's why I said it's not a big surprise to see him being inconsistent. But I was hoping I would be wrong with that. And I hope when it comes down to this tournament that isn't the case. I think he's a great player. I think he's a fantastic player. But when you played with the same group of guys, they've not made a roster change. The H2K guys hadn't. But when you make a roster change, after so long of being with the same team, it really shakes your overall mentality up. Because when you're playing with that team, you're not thinking, oh, I should maybe practice something else in case I get dropped from the roster. Like, no, that's never the case. If you're with your team for so long, especially when you're in a team house with them, you think the team's going to be together forever. Like, not really. Not realistically, but you don't really see the end of the team when you're even with, like, people who are watching the stream right now or who are players. When you're with that team, most of the time when you're in the scrims, you're playing with one another, you're focusing on your roles and whatnot. You're not automatically thinking, when is this team going to end? Like, when do I have to worry about this team ending? And of course, that comes into play. Most of the time, amateurs have to deal with that, so maybe that's not the best overall consensus to bring up. Consensus was the word I was trying to say. But when you play with the roster for so long, with a group of guys that you feel confident in, beating Optic Gaming UMG South Carolina, highlight of their probably career for Black Ops 3, beating Team Liquid after being down 0-3, making a reverse sweep at a best of 7 that's never happened before, except for the series prior. Never happened before, and that happens. Those major surprises is what held this team together, and the reason why they didn't make a roster change before then. So the fact is that Lacefield isn't necessarily as leaned upon on complexity, but he is a guy that's going to have to be in some ways a role player and play consistent. And Lacefield was used to that on H2K, but it was kind of like a hit or miss, right? If he's not playing well, maybe you could see Fizzerp kind of take a little bit of the role. Maybe he can kind of do that. Maybe Fears and Legal kind of be that duo and perform well with one another. On this team, though, complexity is a little bit different. It's differently wired. Ricky's a consistent guy. If one of the guys in the main frame isn't going to do well, Ricky will pick that up. He plays a lot like Karma. Not necessarily the same role necessarily, but whenever one of the players on your team is kind of struggling, Ricky will pick that up and he will run with it. So he kind of has that little bit of a backbone in Ricky, but he's at a point where if you want to make a team a dynasty, you have got to, and I'm not saying this team wants to make a dynasty by any means. Maybe it's just the Cole Lakes thing. Maybe that's gotten me all driven up about this. But when you have a team who wants to make a run, when you have a guy, and this roster to me has a lot of early capabilities of being a great squad. They have a lot of key components I think can make them a great team later on down the line. And I think that Lacefield is one of those guys who can be a part of one of those teams. I really do. But to be a major squad, you've got to have a great, consistent sub player at all times, whatever Aikes' role is on the team, whatever Ricky's role on the team will be. But Aikes, he picked up these guys for a reason. And Lacefield and accuracy, to me, are huge factors in how they do. Not just because they're half the team, because this is their opportunity to shine. This is their opportunity to play with some great players, great consistent players. There's not a whole lot of guys who are around right now who are at the top of their game in their Call of Duty history have been playing for over 5+ years. Aikes and Ricky are some of those guys. You don't get that many you don't get an opportunity like that all the time. You don't get an opportunity like that every team that you play on. These two specifically. So the fact that you have a major opportunity, plus you're in one of you're probably in the hardest pool by anyone's opinion, in Pool C, you've got to make something happen. And I apologize for focusing so long on Pool C, the Pool of Death. But I wanted to give a perspective of where I'm looking at for complexity right now, go into major depth with how I'm looking at them right now, because they have a major opportunity to make some upsets happen. And I think that they have the capability to beat a Rise Nation. But it's hard for me to form an opinion where I see complexity beating Rise. And saying that that's likely. However, whenever you have a Lacefield and accuracy who are going up against the likes of a dominant sub player and a guy like Looney, and a great AR player and a guy like Octane, who I hope is on form for this tournament, there's a lot of storylines that are kind of coming into this, a lot of little factors that are coming into this that I think are incredibly, incredibly interesting. That, in my opinion, a lot of people aren't really focusing on. That is just my opinion, though. You guys can obviously leave your opinions on who you think makes it out of this group. To me, FaZe is the clear-cut team who I think is going to make it out. Open Bracket Squad, unfortunately, that's how I hate Open Bracket Squads. Not I hate them, but I hate having to make predictions when I don't know what roster is going to be in it. And of course, whenever I start making my night-by-night predictions videos, like recaps and whatnot of the days at Orlando, it'd be a lot easier for me to make that happen. But the major matchup that I'm obviously looking forward to is going to be Complexity versus Rise. Kind of breaking it down, I think Rise will probably take the hard point. Search and Destroy, I'd probably give to Complexity. But despite the fact that Rise Nation could lose this overall series, which everyone knows, they are very consistent. They are incredibly consistent when it comes down to game modes. Maybe that consistency isn't as good as it previously has been, but they can win any game type. They can win a hardpoint. They can win a search. They can win an uplink. They can win a CTF. And I think this matchup for Complexity is kind of interesting because, granted, they add a little bit of slaying power. But if this team gets down, Aikes is trying to get the guys back. Ricky's trying to bring the guys back. They get a little bit of frustration. Lacefield's not maybe performing the way that he thinks he should be because of the fact that he hasn't played with a different group of guys in so long. Accuracy's trying to hold the stress that he probably has right now of constantly trying to perform, yet not having the opportunity to do so. So when he has an opportunity to do so, he's facing off against the biggest pool in Orlando. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of pressure going down on these guys. That's why I'm giving it to Rise. So I think it's going to be FaZe and Rise Nation to make it out of this group. Unfortunately, I can't predict who's going to be the open bracket team. That is my prediction. It's the reason why I'm predicting the things in a way that I am. Before we move on to Group D, now we're taking a commercial break. If you were thinking that, you're wrong. I want to give a massive shout out to everyone who has followed so far on the stream. These are a little bit later, so unfortunately these guys might have already left the stream, unfortunately. I think I said unfortunately 3 times there. But major shout out to J-Track, It's Adam MPD, Leonidas Messi 10, Hypeno the Bozo. I can't do that. Scumpy's MSMC, Jesse Jenkins 100, and more recently Exos Chris. Thank you guys all for the follows. Greatly appreciate it. If you guys would like to, of course, you can feel free to hit the follow button to know exactly when we are going live at all times. We've already received a $1 donation tonight from Chris from Pixelmaniacs. Donations are always very much appreciated. You guys can obviously feel free to do that. It's not necessary, though, but it is available to you. You guys can obviously focus on the social media up above, especially for the HUD. Make sure to follow the HUD on TV, on Twitter. Moving forward, though, let's now go over to Group D. Group D is going to be consisting of Optic, LG, TK, and an open bracket squad. Yes. Everyone's thoughts automatically. Optic Gaming and Luminosity, they're in the same pool? That sounds familiar. That sounds very familiar. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It is kind of funny, though, that in Group D, yet again, you have Optic Gaming and T-Caliber, who have somehow ended up in the same bracket. This was always, for those who may be a little bit newer, or maybe just don't know or haven't caught up yet, it was always a funny thing that Team Caliber seems in every single tournament that they've been in, they always get put in a group with Optic. It's honestly been a lot of their struggles, has been the fact that they've been put in a group with Optic, so it's almost a guaranteed loss a lot of the time, if not every time. So it's kind of funny now that we're seeing TK kind of make a comeback in Call of Duty, especially being put in group play automatically, not having to go through the old bracket like they did at Anaheim. That now that they're back in the Call of Duty scene, it's exactly like where we left off, to where they're being put in the same group with Optic and so on and so forth. So let's talk about Optic Gaming first of all. I know they're not at the top of the list for the Group D. But Optic Gaming, coming off of major loss in Season 2 finals, of course, versus Luminosity. Game comes down to Game 7. It's a fantastic series. Everyone's thinking Optic might actually do it. They might make a little bit of a comeback here. They can do this, right? And then round by round, LG starts to take it away. They close it out versus Optic. Twitter went crazy, literally. Nobody thought that Optic was going to lose. They've gone to Game 7s and passed. They went I think they went to Game 7 versus TSM more recently as well at a tournament. It's happened. But they always seem to close it out. I've constantly said this. I think the Optic Gaming are some of the best closers in all Black Ops 3. Not that that necessarily really hinders that, but it definitely kind of provides a factor. It throws a little bit of a wrench into the mix. Sorry, I almost choked. I'm not sure why my voice went like that. But they have been practicing probably more now than they have in a very long time, if ever, in Black Ops 3. And the reason why it's hard for me to say that more than anyone else, because a lot of people might say that, is that there are a lot of teams, there are a lot of players who don't stream their scrims. They don't stream when they're doing that all the time. And of course, Optic are a group of guys who do that. All of them probably do. On a consistent basis is what I'm trying to say. But just about every single night, for hours on end, they're playing, they're practicing, they're scrimming. Thank God that other people are as well. They've been looking pretty consistent, right? They've been looking very consistent. But there have been times, though, when they haven't had the streams on. And that's when a lot of the development is going on. That's when a lot of the strategy is being talked. Because they're going to have times on stream where they're talking about certain things, where they're going over certain strategies and whatnot that people can see. A lot of the issues that they've had have been on Breach. That was actually a major problem they had whenever they played actually against Luminosity Gaming that we just talked about. Unfortunately, Matt Vitos, I don't believe, are going to be at Orlando. They weren't at Season 2 finals. And I really realistically think that if the maps were different, that Optic probably would have won that series. Despite the fact, though, I think that that loss actually does more play positives than negatives. Because they've lost officially, right? Every time that Optic has lost at a tournament this year, whatever time it's been at, Whether it was at Totino's when they lost to Rise Nation. Oh, what was the first tournament of the year? It was more of a showcase than an actual tournament. I agree with that, actually. They lose to H2K. Well, the controllers were messing up. Everyone had a problem. I agree with that. There have been times where they've lost this year, and every time, in some cases, when it comes down to a LAN, there has been, in some ways, an excuse. And I don't want to give the word excuse the definition that it has, because every time I say excuse, it's like, oh, well, they're using an opportunity or someone's, giving them a way out. And I'm not saying that, because there's been a lot of little outside things that have happened that have kind of gone into it. So the fact is that when they come to this tournament, they're not practicing as much as they should have. They know that. They've said that. I agree with that. They face off against Luminosity, and they lose. There's no question. There is, for one of the first times in all of Black Ops 3 at a LAN performance where they've lost, that this one has, without a doubt, no recoil to say an excuse in the background. There's no, this happened, the controllers are messing up, there was lag, they didn't have headsets whenever they were playing online at that one studio or whatever. They didn't have headsets and they were playing against Envious. It's one of the first time they've suffered a loss that the fans knew, and to where they knew that they actually, for real, without any question, any outside opportunities, saying, we lost this series. And they lost it early. They lost in the first round. It was a very talented Luminosity gaming team, which I'll talk about in just a second. This Luminosity team has looked great. I mean, absolutely fantastic. Granted, they ended up losing into Game 7 later on. But they're a great team. I think they ended up losing to DT, actually. They're a great team. And that's nothing to have the Optic Gaming, fans or even themselves to hold their heads down. But when you are the best team in the world, it is hard to stay at the consistency that you are at. Like I said, it's lonely at the top. It's lonely at the top. It's hard to practice when you're constantly beating teams. You're saying, well, we don't have really anything to focus on. Granted, some of our maps aren't the best. Maybe our hard points, if we lose our hard point, we can kind of struggle. If we're playing a breach, if we're playing an evac. Actually, evac is really actually meant they're very strong on. Either way, though, you get my point. My only thing, though, that if I was the Optic Gaming coach or whatever, if I was involved with them, I would say, I hope that they have been working on the holes in their game rather than their strong suits. I hope that they have been focusing on the things that they've been lacking in rather than kind of padding on what has been something that they're consistent at. So, for example, if I was to say, maybe if I want to say like an example, and I was to point out maybe like their hard point game, and I was like, well, let's play an evac or a stronghold. Let's play an evac or a stronghold. For those who don't know, they ended up going 9-0 in those maps combined for stage 2. Let's focus on the maps. Let's make sure that we're as consistent as we can. And it's easy to say, oh, well, I'm sure they're focusing on the holes that are in the game. They're just trying to improve. There are sometimes where teams will literally focus on only the things that they're good at. They're focused on their hard point. They're focused on their search and destroy. We're not focusing on our uplink. We're not focused on the maps that we really struggle with a lot of the time. We're not focusing on our fringes or on our breaches. And those series can happen. Like I said, Season 2 Finals was a perfect example of why I'll always talk about map vetoes and why you have to be prepared for your worst map rotation ever. And that's really exactly what Luminosity Gaming had against Optic. Optic had some of the worst maps that they could have ever asked for in that rotation. I think like 4 out of the 7 of them were their worst maps that they could have chosen from. You have to be prepared for that, in my opinion. Move on, though. I apologize. Next, we have Luminosity Gaming. Of course, everyone knows, coming off of a great victory versus Optic Gaming at Season 2 Finals. They end up losing to DT in Game 7. And thank you, by the way, Mason, for putting in the chat. He did point out that E United GG picked up Wheat's team. I believe after the last commercial break, we did mention that, but it was a very recent thing, so I appreciate you for bringing that up. And for those who may be kind of coming in, E United picked up the XTSM roster that Mason obviously mentioned in the chat. I know for the audio listeners, we talked about that a little bit earlier, which is fine, in case you guys might have missed it. But talking about LG, though, incredibly solid team, incredibly overall solid roster. And they've been very solid ever since the addition of Nameless. Ever since they added Nameless to the team, something has just changed. And every team that I had heard that Nameless was on, whatever teammates he's had, kind of pointed that he was maybe a little bit of the problem, whatever roster that he's been on throughout the year. A lot of the time, whenever he's on Complexity, everyone's saying, well, Nameless is the issue. Nameless is the problem. You shouldn't have got rid of Parasite. You shouldn't have got rid of this guy. Nameless is the problem. Nameless is the problem. You should be making the decisions. Then when he goes to a team who in some cases, a lot of people's opinion was a downgrade, especially after losing John, they sent him to the LG team, and they just absolutely dominate. They play so well. And it was awesome to watch because I liked the Luminosity Gaming team. As players, I liked them. As guys, really. Not as players, but I mean, you get my point. I like everyone as players. But off the game, I liked them a lot as well. But they've looked really, really good in a lot of their matches. A lot of the time, they're going to catch teams off guard in their hard points, which are very, very lethal. They're, to me, probably one of the more lethal teams when it comes down to a certain game type, where they're not maybe predicted to do that well in. So, for example, if I was to tell you that, this is just something random, but if I was to tell you that, just give me a random team, TK's uplink game was incredible. They are not going to lose an uplink at MLG Anaheim. People would be like, what? Like, are they really that good at uplink? It's the same thing to me with LG in their hardpoint game. I think they are very good at hardpoint. Not many people realize that. But they can absolutely destroy many teams in hardpoint. And they can surprise a lot of teams. They can beat Optic in hardpoint. They can beat Envious in hardpoint. They're a great squad. I'm really looking forward to seeing how they play. Nameless is obviously a big factor. I think he's going to perform. Despite MLG Anaheim, you had a really big carry a lot of the times from Study, which he played incredibly well also. I think if Saints is playing well, Saints in past has had a little bit of issues when he versus Optic Gaming. He doesn't have the best performances. But apparently, as of recently, that doesn't really seem to be a problem anymore. And it doesn't just go to Optic versus LG at Season 2 Finals. They also faced off against each other at Anaheim. That match happened. Optic won it, but it was very close. That was the game that Study would run off on. And maybe if the other players maybe would have showed up a little bit more, that series maybe could have gone a different direction. But every time these guys play, it's very close, and I fully expect the exact same results. We'll move on. Team Cowboy, the last squad that we talked about in Pool D before we talk about open bracket squads. We might even maybe talk about the DT situation. We may kind of touch on it for a second. I know I've been going on for a long time, but I want to focus on these teams. It's very important to me to bring this up. TK from Group D. This was obviously the second team who ended up qualifying for Pro Points, which had the roster, which is newly announced, of Theory, of course. Then they added Colchan, Happy, and Gunjar. This team is okay. It's all right. It's not my favorite team by any means. Not personally that impressed by it. This is not Theory's best title. This is not Gunjar's best performances as of late that he's kind of had. He's a great player, and I think he definitely should have been added to a team, and I was kind of surprised that he hadn't been added to a team earlier. Because it was a struggle for him to find a roster. It's like, why is Gunjar still looking for a team whenever there was like a couple weeks left? So I'm glad that TK ended up picking him up. Everyone always talks about, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that TK is recycling players again. They got Gunjar on the team. Like, what is this? People were predicting that Sharp and Nestle were going to come back, which obviously did not happen. And it would never have happened. But I don't think the whole recycling of players is a factor for this team. I think Gunjar was a logical pick to pick up. Whether he played with TK in the past or not, he needed to be picked up by someone, so I'm glad that TK happened to be the team to do that. However, though, I'm not going to point out any player directly on this team, because I'm not like that. But from TK, this team just does not really, to me, show any possibilities of really making a huge upset on anyone. based on previous performances, which have been on different teams, I don't think that there are any guys on this particular roster who together can form like a dynamic duo. Because some teams you'll have guys who aren't necessarily the best at slaying. You'll have two guys who can kind of lead the way. You'll have two guys in the back who kind of maybe can lead in the slaying. If one guy's struggling, maybe they can kind of add in a little bit. Have the team is dominant. Have the other team kind of focuses on the objective or the overall win the game. The other two are focused on slaying. With TK, that may happen. But there's some major questions for me for this team when it comes down to slaying. Gunjar, to me, has got to absolutely take hold of this team. If he does not play the best of his abilities, if he's not grabbing a 1.0, 1.1 KD, consistently going off in every single game type, unless something magical happens, they're not going to make it in the top 2 teams of this pool. If Kulchan isn't playing to the same consistent level as he was on TSM, which I'm sure is going to be to me, it'll be a big transition for him because obviously he's played with those guys for a while, but he's used to being, in some way, no offense, but he's used to being an amateur. Black Ops 3 has really been like kind of a risen game for him. He's used to that whole switching teams constantly. He's used to that lifestyle. He's used to that possibility of not having a team a week later or a day later. He's used to that. So I don't think that we're going to see a major drop in his overall performance. One guy that I'm looking at, though, is going to be Happy. Happy, to me, is a question mark for sure for TK. I think, and this is just my opinion, I think he can be the X factor for the squad. And I think maybe even his performance can kind of change how the whole tournament goes for them. And it'd be different if they didn't have the best team in the world in their pool right now. If they didn't have the Optic Gaming in their group, maybe they could make a good performance versus someone else. And then when they verse Optic, it's not going to be pretty. When they verse Luminosity, it's potential. They have got, to me, they have to win the game versus Luminosity, which I don't think is going to happen. Unless Luminosity has an outwardly bad performance, I don't see TK winning either of those games. And then you have the open bracket team, who could be anyone. I don't know who the exact team would be. If anyone wants to put that in the chat, feel free to do so. We can kind of talk about it for a second. However, though, I don't see them beating Optic, and I don't see them beating LG either. They're a good team. From what I've watched, I know their uplinks are fairly decent. I think their search and destroys aren't bad either. I know Theory and Kulchan are more of like the snipers when it comes down to it. Kulchan's going to be the main sniper. Happy's a good search and destroy player as well. Kunjar's consistent. I like the team. It's just I don't see anyone on this roster who I'm saying that is the guy who's going to be consistently going off for them. No question about it. Playing consistent. Not having any worries about this particular role. Every role on this team, I think, can be at times a little shaky, which makes me a little bit skeptical saying, well, what if one of them doesn't play well? What if Gunjar has an off game? Do you think that Theory and Happy can combine to pick up for Gunjar's slack and also rise to the occasion? Because it's going to happen at least one time. It's going to happen at least one game. That's why I'm saying Gunjar has to have a massive performance a lot of the time. Same thing with Kulchan. Happy has to step up as well. There's a lot of pressure on the TK team. This is in some ways their major comeback to being in groups. Of course, they were at Anaheim, but no one really was able to see them. They had a good, amazing group of young guys. They just couldn't make it far. Holler and Exotic especially, and Khalifa. They dropped those guys, which is kind of unfortunate. I wish they would have, kept a few. Kept one or two. However, though, they move forward. And this is a major step for them because now they're in a major tournament again. They're kind of at a stepping stone. This is their opportunity to get back to the pedestal as being a major organization in Call of Duty again. If they cannot rise to the occasion, it's a big deal because there's a lot of TK fans out there, man. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of fans who have kind of been holding out, waiting for them to get into the main bracket. Whenever I was at Anaheim, I was having people telling me, please update me on the TK game that's going on right now. Please give me an update on the TK game in the open bracket. There's a lot of fans out there for TK. I know that they have a major amount of pressure on their shoulders. Hope that they can perform. However, I do have Optic and Luminosity Gaming coming out of Group D, so I can kind of give you guys a little bit of a recap really quick. Not taking into consideration what pool play, or what open bracket team will make it through For Pool A, I believe I have Envy and Elevate making it through. From Pool B, I have Infused and DT. From Group C or Pool C, I have Rise Nation and FaZe. And from Pool D or Group D, I have Omni Gaming and Luminosity Gaming, which really isn't a surprise. Those are basically the most standard picks that you can make, which is kind of unfortunate. I wish I'd had a little bit of a surprise in there. But generally, from what I've been able to notice, that's how it should go. However, I can guarantee you that at least 2 or 3 of my predictions will probably be wrong. And a lot of those mostly going to come in the open bracket, which we're going to talk about right now. Not going to go over these teams for very, very long due to the fact that we've been going on for such a long time about the pool play already. But going over the open bracket potential squads are going to be Kingsman, Allegiance, Cloud9, and Echo Fox. Those are in order the top 4 seeds. Some other great teams to kind of mention are obviously the MW team, the other MW team as well. You have I2 or Intuition. There's Lethal. There's Panda. There's Kingdom. There's Apotheon. There's a lot of really good squads in the open bracket. A lot of them can definitely make some noise. First team though, Kingsman has the number 1 seed coming into this tournament. New roster of Miracles, Parasite, Mox, as well as Lamagod. Curious to see how this roster performs. I've been able to watch them in their scrims here and there. Not as much as I would like, but able to watch them play a good amount. One guy that I'm a huge fan of, though, is Mox. Mox, previous player for Cloud9 Eclipse. Great player. To me, one of the more underrated players that we have in the game right now. And there's always a guy who I personally like in a particular title. Advanced Warfare and probably like the beginning of Black Ops 3. My favorite amateur has been Holler for a very long time. I think he was kind of taking that over, not taking it away from Holler. But as far as like an amateur player who is just absolutely crazy good is Mox. Mox is incredible. Transitional AR, roams around the map with an AR like it's an SMG. Didn't really get to see him play too much for Cloud9 Eclipse when I was at Anaheim. Know a little bit of his history. I know some of the rosters that he's played on before. He's a good player. His teammates always kind of give high credit to him. I think he's going to perform at a consistent basis. Especially because I like the overall mix of young talent to good talent. Or not that. Young talent to veterans. What I was trying to say. Young talent to veterans. I like the mix that they have right now. Because, of course, you have 2 experienced guys, 2 world champions in both Miracles and Parasite. 2 younger guys. Mox, more known in Black Ops 3. Lamagod, known from Advanced Warfare. Most 2 recent titles. You have world champions for Black Ops 2, which is what, 2011, 2012? But I like the idea, like I said, along with a good mix of young talent to veterans, you also have a great leader. A guy who was retired a week ago. He's come back. He's wearing the number 45 on the mat. No, I'm joking. Parasite, as everyone knows, retired for a short time, a couple hours, and he's kind of come back. A little bit of a joke. Everyone knew he was going to come back. I didn't think it was going to be that fast, though. I thought he was going to be coming back, but I didn't think it was going to be that quick. However, though, whenever I look at Parasite's team, I automatically look at the players around him, and I say, can they work with him? Can they take responsibility? Can they take, not really necessarily yelling indirectly, but can they take order? If they're down in a series, and Parasite's blaming it on a person, and maybe he's, not when I say blaming, whenever he's calling out someone for making a bad play, can they take that and say, yes, I will improve on that. Yes, I will move on from that. I think these guys can. I think they absolutely can. That automatically, to me, makes them have a lot of respect for them. And it's not very often that you're going to see 2 guys being Miracles and Parasite who are in the open bracket. I'm probably counting my fingers how many times they've probably been in an open bracket in the last 5 years. So I'm looking forward to seeing how Kingsman performs. Great team. They didn't get that number 1 seed in the open bracket for no reason. And I easily think they're one of the top teams as far as amateur teams right now are considered. With pro players on the team. I will point that out. Next squad we have is going to be Allegiance. Of course, a new organization entering into Call of Duty. More of a Halo organization. They announced a new roster of Mochila, Remy, Royalty, and Exotic. On paper, I like the team a lot. Reality, not a lot of leadership. Close games to me probably wouldn't favor them very much. I think they're a good team, but personally, I really don't think they're going to go that far. I really don't. Open bracket's a grind. As everyone knows, if you had a team in the open bracket, if you play in the open bracket, it is a grind, and you have to have a little bit of leadership bringing you through that. You have to have someone supporting you, have to have a little bit of a veteranship, someone who's been in that experience in past. And I like the guys on ALG. I like those guys a lot. Whenever I look at Exotic, when I look at Royalty, when I look at Remy, maybe even Mochilla as well, but mostly those three, I say I would like them to have maybe a more experienced player along with them, to where when the grinding comes down to it, they have a possibility to rise to the occasion. But I don't know, personally don't think, that if they're in a close grinding game, because whether you believe it or not, they're going to go to game 3 at least 1 point, probably. They're probably going to have a really close game at some points. Every really good team has had those opportunities happen to them. Excuse me, and at some points, that's what's gotten them knocked out. They think they're going to win it. They don't really care about the first game. Oh, we lost that, big deal. We'll win the next 2. Then it comes down to a game 3, they're not expecting what's going to come at them. So yeah, I think out of the 4, this team to me probably is one who's not going to make it. I like the guys a lot. I'm a big fan of Exotic. Big fan of Royalty and Remy again together. Old TR guys, the original TR team before, I think, Vicento. Great gun skill. Great young gun skill as well. Without a doubt, I think Royalty and Exotic will be some of the top players in the game moving and forward with titles. I think Remy as far as an objective player as well. Can't take anything away from Mochilla either. I'm just saying I don't think the ALG is going to make it very far. I really don't. Moving forward, though, we have Cloud9. Now, I've given credit to Cloud9 all year. The entire year, I've given a major credit to Cloud9 for them forming the 2-roster strategy. Because for those who don't know, throughout the entire year, Cloud9 has had a great strategy of having 2 different teams, having the regular Cloud9 roster and having Cloud9 Eclipse. They're a little bit slow to get involved with Call of Duty. Fortunately for them, they end up qualifying for Stage 2. They keep Cloud9 and Eclipse as a thing, but they keep them as a strategy. Meaning that if the Cloud9 team has any problems, if a player isn't performing to his best ability, if 2 players aren't performing to their best ability, that they have a roster full of guys, four guys who they can constantly pull talent from. And a lot of people don't like the idea of saying, oh my gosh, it is technically a B team. That is the definition of what Cloud9 Eclipse was. Whether you believe it or not, that is the definition of what they were. They were literally the development league team. Meaning that if some player was performing at a high level on that particular roster, they get added to the next spot to where a player who was underperforming on the regular Cloud9 team, they would swap. That's exactly what happened with the regular Cloud9 team with Mochilla and Assault. Assault was performing very well for Cloud9 Eclipse. He ends up joining in place of Mochilla, play the same roles in AR. Their paces are different. And then now, they end up releasing 2 players before this particular tournament, which is a major leap for them. Because, of course, releasing 2 players means that they automatically are not going to be possible to be in the pool play. And that's a major step. That's a huge, to me, step. But the reason why I can give credit to that step and I can say, you know what? I understand the decision behind that is that they have 2 young guys on that Cloud9 roster who are literally the definition of big time. This is a page out of, I can't think of his name right now. I just lost it. I forget his name. I was getting ready to say it. But these guys are big time players. Stephen A. Smith. There it is. Stephen A. Smith. He always calls players big time. They didn't take this risk of potentially being in the pool play and then releasing 2 guys and adding 2 others. They didn't make that risk and not have a little bit of confidence behind it. They have two amazing young players in both Assault and Havoc. Great guys. Great young players. Play different roles, which I think is great. Assault, more of a very standard, slow AR player. Not going to move around the map that much, but his aim never moves. I don't know how his M8 is able to do that. The Shiva in his hands is deadly. You have Havoc. Incredible SMG. Very, very quick. One of the most consistent guys that we have. He oftentimes gets a lot of flack because people will say that people oftentimes give Havoc a little bit of discredit, saying, well, people give him credit because he's not as good as people think he is. And I look at it at the point of proven until guilty. Until he has a bad performance at a tournament, then I will take that in consideration and average those out. But he hasn't had a bad LAN yet. He was great in Advanced Warfare. By no means was he a top player, but he was a great player in what he did. So you have those two who are great already, and then you add a guy like Silly. Silly, the definition of a moving AR. I think the ARs on this team are great. Having the transition of guys who can slay, get the slaying job done, and have different AR roles. There are certain teams who have ARs on the roster, and they play too similarly. Both of them like to run. Both of them like to play consistent. Both of them like to play the same place. These guys are night and day difference, but they also both play the same role. Silly will run around the map with an AR, with a Tempest in his hands. Depending on what he's feeling like, he might go with something a little bit different, especially with the meta as of recently with specialists. He's actually one of the early users of the Tempest. For those who don't know, like, he was using the Tempest before it was popular. He was an OG Tempest user. Besides that, though, then you have a guy like Assault, who's as young as he is, played for Justice. I know Big Snacks is in the chat right now. And to me, it's really funny as well. This is a team who I never would have thought would have formed if you were looking at Advanced Warfare, and you would have looked at two Isolation Empire guys, and a guy from Justice, who ended up placing top 6 or top 5 in MLG World Finals. You have two teams who are the definition of having younger squads, and now they're forming together to form a power team in the open bracket who potentially, to me, can be one of the top teams right now. The fact that they're forming together leaves a smile on my face. It really does. I'm very excited to see these guys play together. I'm excited to see Silly and Havoc form together again, the old half of Isolation Empire. But one guy that I haven't talked about, though, is Swarly. I've talked about the big three. You gotta have a big three to me in Black Ops 3 to be successful. Top teams in the world right now have a big three. And Cloud9, to me, has those guys. Granted, they're younger. Maybe the fact of not having a major leader on the team could definitely affect them. I think they're very, at least in my opinion, I don't know how to say it, but I think they can kind of lead themselves, if that makes sense. But one guy that I haven't talked about, though, is Swarly. Many people don't really know too much about Swarly. I'm going to be honest, I don't know a crazy amount about him either. I've casted over him in tournaments in past. I know he was on the old Carnage roster back in Advanced Warfare where HUD kind of got his name started. He's played with some of the top amateur players in the world who later rose to be top players, not just HUD. But I know that when it came down to making this roster, that they wouldn't have added a player like him for no reason. They wouldn't have added a player like him and said, you know what, we realize the talent that we have on this team. Because they could have kept Happy. They could have kept Happy. Happy plays objective, so Swarly plays objective. Llama God, more of an AR. Well, they could have moved maybe Havoc. They could have changed roles around if they wanted to. But they chose Swarly. They chose him instead. And a lot of times organizations, for some teams, will make decisions for them. Say, you know what, you don't need that player. They'll kind of add in their own incentive if they know about the Call of Duty game. If they know about the game, some organizations have no idea what's going on in the Call of Duty game, and they'll just let the players make decisions. And most of the time, it's probably for the best. But I'm curious to see how he plays. He's going to be the main objective guy for this team. But realistically, well, there may be a little bit of pressure on his shoulders because of the fact that he has some great guys around him. People might be curious to see how he performs. I especially am one of those guys. If they can make it out of the group or out of the pools, the open bracket, excuse me, into the pools, and he starts playing against these top talent, when he has to do his job and when he has to get the slaying done at a clutch moment, can he live up to that capability? Can he do that? Because you can't have Havoc kind of coming back to the hill and saying, oh, Havoc, we need to have double subs in the hill right now when Havoc's trying to do his thing. Make him kind of take away from his game and add it into someone else's. If they can play as a unit, if Swirly can have a great tournament, this can be a team, to me, finishes top 5. I think they have the capability to do that. Do I think they're going to do that? I don't know. I really don't. But I think they have the capability to do that. And rarely do I give a team a lot of credit than they probably deserve. And I know that I'm giving Cloud9 a lot of credit they may not deserve right now. But there are times where I see something special, really special in a team. I think that they have the capability to do that as long as they stick together. Maybe Orlando doesn't work out, head into Call of Duty XP and make some noise. I think they can do that. I'm not saying they're going to be the same TR. And they're not going to be a TR in the next Call of Duty Championships. But it's happened. There's a platform. Someone's done it before. You can do it again. It's out there. They can take that. Last roster, as far as the top 4 are concerned from the open bracket, is going to be Echo Fox. Good group of guys. One of my favorite organizations right now in all of esports, Echo Fox. Of course, owner Rick Fox. Motivated. All of them are motivated. All of them are clear-minded. They're well taken care of, like I said. And it's awesome to see that a team who's not necessarily in the mainframe of professional organizations is being as well taken care of as they are. And Lord knows that Neslo needs that, right? I mean, Neslo needs that. He needs an organization where he feels at home, where he's not losing constantly, where these guys aren't feeling like they're having a problem. They're very well taken care of. And I think that Echo Fox, honestly, as far as Call of Duty organizations are concerned, of course, you have to keep in mind the money is a major thing. Organizations don't always have the same amount of money. Echo Fox, I know, obviously has that. But it's nice to see an organization, for what I've been able to watch, the amount of credit that they give their players is great. And like I said, money can definitely make that happen. But it's really nice to see that even though they're not the top team in the world right now, they're not necessarily taken as a top pro team, they're being treated like one. And I like that a lot. I really do. I like that a lot. And I think that only makes them want to succeed. Personally, I work a lot better when someone gives me the reins and says, hey, do this. Because it puts pressure on me to want to perform for them. I think that's where Echo Fox is right now. I think that's what Echo Fox is right now. They're giving their players the reins. They're saying, hey, we've given you this platform. We've literally given you a lot of things. Perform. So I said they're motivated. They're clear-minded. It's not the best group in the world, but they're a great group of guys. The chemistry is there. They're confident. They're feeling good. And maybe that can also maybe be their downfall. That definitely has a double-edged sword to it. They can look at it as, wow, they've given us all of this. We've got to come out and perform for them. Or it can obviously go the other way. But to me, they're a great group of guys who will win off of teamwork, but not necessarily their gun skill. They don't have the best. They're not going to go hand to hand with Optic. They're not going to go hand to hand whatever group they get placed in. They're not going to go hand to hand with them as far as gun skill is concerned. They're going to go with them when it comes down to their overall teamwork together. Cyborg is a great AR player. He's a great young AR player. I know online he hasn't been playing the best, but I know he has an issue with 3 bars. He constantly talks about that, so I know it's obviously a problem with him. So I can't really take that into consideration too much. Proofy's a great player. In past, hasn't really looked as of great as of recent. Nestle, to me, is by far the best player on this team. Great communicator. But he can have a little bit of problems at times. Easily. I'm also curious to see how Sinful performs as well. Because granted, they went to Anaheim. They are kind of motivated. They end up getting placed in the loser's bracket in round 1. I think they end up losing pretty early on. They had an opportunity to make something happen, but it just didn't work out. So while I like the team, I feel like I'm trying to rely on a certain factor where I'm looking at and saying, well, the gun skill isn't there. Maybe the teamwork can be there. Well, they don't really have the most methodical, diabolical players in the world. How's that going to work? I'm curious to see how this team performs. I'm really looking at Cyborg. I'm really looking at Sinful as well. Curious to see how they perform on LAN. I know Sinful early played for Cloud9 at South Carolina. Didn't perform. Roster splits apart. He tries to find a team. He's kind of silent for a while. Curious to see how the roster performs, though. I do think they're very easily read, which to me, like I said, I'm kind of honestly giving a lot of credit to them, but I'm also kind of a little bit skeptical as well. Because while I compare them to DT, they literally run the exact same strategy every time when it comes down to Barrier Protect, when it comes down to their special strat. I know exactly what they're going to run every map, and I've only watched them for maybe a few hours. So I can only imagine if any amateur team, if any team has studied them, as well as they've been known, as long as they've been together, I'm sure teams have a lot of history or knowledge on them. If they know anything about them, Banner Protects can be a problem. But maybe Echo Fox has practiced that. Like I said, there's a lot of things that we don't get to see as viewers, but only as an organization or as players or as a team. So those are the top 4 teams in the open bracket. Of course, Kingsman ranked number 1, ALG or Allegiance ranked number 2, Cloud9 ranked number 3, and Echo Fox ranked number 4. Another team being MW. Our most wanted, of course, the second roster of Sensor, Methods, BLFire, and Examples. Granted, I'm glad that Sensor's back. Glad that he's coming back just in general. Great dude. Doug's an awesome guy. Talked to him a few times. Obviously has a lot of success on YouTube more recently, which I think only helps the scene. And I'm glad that he has the drive to want to come back. Do I think the roster can make some noise? Probably not. I would be very surprised if they make it to the pools. But they do have a pretty experienced group when it comes down to that. Sensor Methods and BLFire, I'm sure you can probably put together those amount of hours, those amount of years that they practice together, and it's going to be a lot higher than probably every other amateur team out there right now. I think Examples can maybe be the main pillar that you kind of rely on and say, well, how's he going to do? He can either make or break the team. He can hold the structure up or he can knock it down. We have the other MW team composed of Hate, Spoofs, Beezy, and Juju. I feel kind of strange when I say that. I got some interesting names. But no, good group. Like the guys a lot. Spoofs coming from Riot. Juju previously played for Panda. I know Hate's been on MW for a while now. Played with a lot of guys in the past. Moved to South Carolina. He played with Nelson on MW. Nelson coming from Jester prior. Now he plays on Panda. Got plays for Juju. So a little bit of a combination there. This is a good team. Another squad we have is I2 or Intuition. Hoff on a victory from ETG 13, a local LAN. Rosters Pimby, Mosh, Gunless, and Profizi. Great group, actually. They definitely have a chance to me to make it out of groups. This is probably, out of the teams that I've listed besides the top 4 so far, this to me is a squad who can beat MW, both MWs. They can beat Lethal, they can beat Panda. They can make some noise. Definitely. Definitely make some noise. And if you've watched any of the 500 series, they're always a top contender. It seems that every time that I've watched the 500 series, the I2 took down this team, and now they're facing off against this squad, and it's close. So watch out for I2. If you're able to watch this tournament, if you look at the open bracket, watch I2. Watch Intuition. They play well. Lethal Squad, I know I talked about them in prior and past. You know, it's like composed like Twiz and those guys. Personally, I don't think they're going to make it very far, unfortunately. Panda, good group, actually. I know they've been in the team house more recently as well. I think it's interesting. That roster is Nelson, Too Quick, Fastballa, and I believe Priest. Good group. I'll talk about them more here in just a second. Before we kind of close out the stream, I'm going to be talking about open bracket potential matchups. Probably not going to talk about DT, the whole thing. I know we've been going for a very long time. I'll leave it at predictions and whatnot. So these are just the matchups that are going to happen if teams don't lose prior. So these matchups, all of these matchups should happen. A lot of these matchups are happening in round 3. It's going to have the tournament lines up. So these are, at least in my opinion, the biggest 4 matches to focus on that will most likely happen. One of those is Kingsman versus Most Wanted. Most Wanted, I believe, being the regular roster, being Censor and those guys. In which case, I give Kingsman the victory on that. MW are pretty solid, though, but I'd give Kingsman the win every day of the week in that. The other one is MW versus Echo Fox. It's a big matchup, of course. One of my favorites. If I'm at Orlando, I am watching this match. I'm sorry. Kingsman versus Most Wanted is the other Most Wanted. I apologize. I meant to say that. MW is Censor's team versus Echo Fox. I'm looking forward to seeing this one. If I'm at Orlando, I'm watching this game. I'm curious to see how Echo Fox performs, especially against a team like MW. It's not just a regular roster of amateurs. It's a group of guys who know what they're doing, who have played in the past. I'm sure a lot of these guys have played on teams in the past as well. Know each other. So if I'm at Orlando, if I'm a spectator, if you're going to be at Orlando, do me a favor. If this match happens, watch it. Watch Most Wanted versus Echo Fox. Do it. One of the last 2 matchups are going to be Cloud9 versus Panda. If you're not going to watch MW versus Echo Fox, watch Cloud9 versus Panda if this match happens. If Cloud9 versus Panda happens, promise me you will watch it. I wish there was a stream for the open bracket. I wish that would happen. This to me should be a win for Cloud9. As much as I've talked about Cloud9 and given them credit, Panda, though, will pull out some very, very interesting strategies. Nelson's known for that. Plus Fastballa and Too Quick of Vex, who had literally hard times of finding scrims because they would ban out the most random things. People would get ticked off. They would refuse to scrim Vex, which composed of Fastball and Too Quick as being 2 of those players. They would literally not play against them because they did not want to be put in the frustration of what they would ban. They would get rid of Stop. They'd get rid of the VMP. They'd get rid of the M8. They would do some random stuff and people hated it. And so whenever I talk about Cloud9, I talk about Swarley, and overall I talk about the open bracket when I said teams who I hope are practicing without certain things that DT has done in the past. They practice like they're going to the open bracket. I hope that Cloud9 has done that. I hope that Cloud9 is ready. If they face off against Panda, that they're ready for a matchup like that. I hope it's possible. I hope that doesn't catch them off guard. Because if it does, you can easily see one of these teams go to the open bracket. And I bet the top 4 teams that I mentioned, not all 4 of them are going to make it. I promise you that. I will promise you that those 4 teams will not make it. Not all 4 of them. The top 4 that I mentioned, Kingsman, Echo Fox, Cloud9, and I2. Or wait, I didn't say I2, did I? I'm sorry. I meant to say Cloud9, Echo Fox, ALG, and Kingsman. Not all 4 of them will not make it. A few of them might, but not all 4. Not all 4 are going to make it into pools. Never happens. I give Cloud9 the win over Panda, but I hope that they're ready for that crazy matchup. Another game that we'll have is going to be I2 versus ALG. I think this will be a close game as well. Probably one of the closest games in all the open bracket. ALG to me is not a solid group. They're a good team. They're a new team. They're good on paper. But I2 have been playing together for a long time. They're to me a stereotypical amateur team to where they are grinding out. And to be honest, I see 2 different perspectives of this game. I see I2 coming out with a very close victory versus ALG, or I see ALG just acting like they're one of the other open bracket teams they have no problem with. I think ALG will either step over them, or if it's close, then I2 walks away with it. I feel very confident in that prediction. I really do. If ALG gets in a close quarter situation with any of these teams, I'm not feeling the most confident in them, especially against a team like I2. Intuition's a great roster. So yeah, guys. Along with that, that's going to kind of do it for my overall thoughts. I know people were talking about, where are your predictions at? Why are you not doing predictions? As time goes on, once I learn the pools, once I learn who's going to be in each pool, then I'll start to form predictions. After day 1 happens, I know it's like, oh, well, it's stereotypical. You're already forming predictions and whatnot. I can give you predictions. It's going to be the same predictions as everyone else because why? That's what should happen. Everyone knows it's not going to happen. I can give you the stereotypical Optic Envy, Rise Phase, whatever you want to put out there. Maybe DT or LG or something like that. But until I know who's in the pools, because I think that's going to make a huge difference as far as the open bracket's considered, that's when I'll start to make predictions and whatnot. So guys, if you guys have enjoyed the show, I know it's been very long. If you guys have missed any of it, if you've missed my early thoughts about stuff, this particular episode will be uploaded on YouTube, youtube.com/AirLandon. You guys have to follow me on Twitter at LandoCon. Feel free to do so. You guys can follow me or you can follow the HUD at the HUD TV on Twitter as well to get live predictions, or not live predictions, live show updates when things are going on, when the shows are going to happen. Working on getting a stable schedule for the show. When that happens, it'll be announced on the HUD TV first. And also when YouTube videos are uploaded, that's exactly where you'll find out that information there as well. As far as me, like I said, you guys can follow me at LandoCon on Twitter. You guys can follow me at L1Lando on Instagram. I've been having a really good time, though, predicting stuff. I know we had, I believe, a top of around 60 viewers. I know we've kind of been up and down a little bit at times. But I had a great show. I think this is awesome. I really enjoyed the discussions with you guys. Thought it was good. I know we went on for a very long time. But like I said, man, I could talk about Call of Duty for hours. I really could. I could have talked about other teams for 2 more hours if possible. But of course, I am trying to bring on other guests. I'm trying to bring on people to come onto the show. Pro players, stuff like that. If you guys have any suggestions or thoughts, you guys can feel free to tweet me. Feel free to tweet the HUD. Use the hashtag the HUD as well. And I'll make sure to check that out. So guys, thank you so much for tuning in to the HUD. It's been an awesome time. One of my favorite episodes that we've had. Make sure to be tuning into MLG Orlando, which happens and starts tomorrow. Should be a great time. See you guys out later. Make sure to stay tuned for more episodes. Probably having episodes every night of MLG Orlando. Giving you guys predictions as well as a recap of each day. See you guys later.